Chapter 757. This was the second time that Li Yi saw the old emperor leave the palace. He was still the same as when he was in Ningguang Fu, wearing an ordinary robe. His face was gentle and he looked like an uncle next door. No one knew that the person in front of them was the most powerful uncle in the entire Jing kingdom. The old emperor's illness was special. It was very dangerous when it acted up, so dangerous that there was a possibility that he would die every time. But normally, if one paid attention, there was no difference between him and a normal person. He did not come alone. The eldest princess was standing next to him, wearing a slim dress. He did not know if it was because of the dress or if her figure had become better, but her figure seemed to be more exquisite than a few days ago. Moving here was for the sake of peace and quiet. There were not many servants in the residence, but even if they met, they would not dare to stop them. So the old emperor had the opportunity to drink the soup that she prepared to trick Xiao Huan to drink. Jianghu came out of the kitchen with 2 bowls of soup. Li Yi glared at him. This old guy really did not treat himself as an outsider. Fortunately, he had his own thoughts and even made a portion for Xiao Huan and Rui. Otherwise there would not be much left for Rui. Jing Emperor picked up another bowl, and Jianghu handed the other bowl to the eldest princess. When they came over, they saw Li Yi put down the soup and went to the back. Jing Emperor drank a few mouthfuls before asking, "Did you make this soup?" He knew that Li Yi had good cooking skills. Because Shanning often talked about it in his ears, he had the chance to taste it today. He was surprised by his cooking skills. It was probably not much different from the imperial chefs in the palace. Jianghu looked at Li Yi and asked, "This soup, is it suitable for your majesty's body to drink more?" Li Yi had once told him about his majesty's illness. There were many things that needed to be avoided on a daily basis, and diet was an important part. He was worried that Li Yi would forget, so he asked about it. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "It's okay. This soup is very nourishing. It's okay to drink a few more bowls." This soup was good for women and there was no harm for men to drink it. It was just a supplement. The Princess Royal had a good figure, but it was only good. Compared to Mississippi Lu, the parts that should be curvy were curvy, but the parts that should be curvy were not curvy enough. She should drink more. Placate the miscarriage and stimulate the breast milk? The spoon that Jing Di had picked up stopped in the air, and the soup spilled on his lapel. Cough, cough. Emingzu put down the bowl. She seemed to have choked and her face was already red. She glared at Li Yi and hurriedly took out a handkerchief to wipe her mouth. Li Yi had never seen her act like a little girl. In fact, he had always regarded the swift and decisive princess as a man. Jing Di put down the spoon, obviously not intending to drink anymore. Emingzu also put down the bowl and secretly looked at Li Yi with a hint of anger. "Your Majesty, why are you?" Li Yi changed the topic at the right time. Jing Di looked at him and asked, "Why? You, the dean of the academy, is allowed to be lazy at home, but we cannot go out of the palace to relax?" Li Yi quickly said, "Steal half a day of leisure. The palace is like a cage. Your Majesty often goes out to relax. It is also good for your illness." Emingzu glanced at him. He was the only one who dared to say that the palace was a cage in front of her imperial father. Steal half a day of leisure? Jing Di looked at him and said with a tone of dissatisfaction, "We think you are stealing half a day of leisure, right?" Jealousy. It was obvious that he was jealous. He obviously saw that he was living a comfortable life and deliberately came to find trouble. Li Yi was too lazy to pay attention to him and stood aside without saying anything. Jing Di looked left and right and asked, "Where are Yongning and Shanning?" Li Yi pointed in a certain direction and said, "At the amusement park." He ordered people to build the amusement park. Several houses were connected and the ground was covered with soft mats. There were rocking cars, merry-go-rounds, slides, swings and other amusement facilities. It was also the favorite place of Yongning, Shanning and Duanwu. Although there were no exciting projects such as roller coasters and skydiving machines, in this era of extreme lack of entertainment, this was already considered super luxurious. "Take us to see." Jing Di seemed to be very interested in this place and stood up. Li Yi originally chose this place because he liked the environment here. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a small park. There was running water in the garden, and the water was so clear that the bottom could be seen. Fish were playing in the water. Although the layout was not very luxurious, it was simple and did not lose its atmosphere. After passing through a bamboo forest path, their field of vision became open again. They could hear bursts of laughter coming from a row of houses. The arrogant Lolita was playing on a swing, and a palace maid was gently pushing it behind her. When she saw Li Yi coming in, she said loudly, Sir, you push me." "They're not pushing high. Li Yi walked over, stopped the swing and carried her down from the swing. The arrogant Lolita pouted and was about to express her dissatisfaction. Suddenly, she opened her eyes wide and saw a figure coming in from outside the door. She ran over in surprise and said, "Father, why are you here?" Yongning also came over and stood quietly beside Jingdi. Jingdi touched their little heads and said, "If father didn't come, my Shanning and Yongning would have almost forgotten father." The arrogant Lolita twisted her body and said in a sweet voice, "Oh, how could Shanning forget father?" Jingdi looked at the two little girls and a trace of sadness appeared on his face. He was their father, but he was also the emperor, the ruler of a country. Since they were young, he did not and could not fully fulfill the responsibilities of a father. It was no wonder that they always wanted to run out of the palace. The arrogant Lolita was full of joy for her father to leave the palace. She grabbed his arm and said, "Father, let's go outside to play. There are a lot of delicious food and fun things on the street. I will take father to the brothel to watch the show." "It is wonderful." Jingdi pinched her little face and said with a smile, "Okay, father will accompany you to have fun today." "Father is so good." The arrogant Lolita shook his arm and looked at Li Yi. She said, "As good as teacher." Li Yi felt that the arrogant Lolita thought that teacher was good because teacher would cook delicious food for her, play with her, and take her to watch interesting shows. Other children could get married at the age of 13. Because she grew up in the palace and was doted on by the emperor and two concubines, her temperament was similar to that of a child. The aged emperor was dragged by Shou Ning through the streets and alleys, sweeping through the crowd. Although there was only Changde following behind them, Li Yi could guarantee that if there was even the slightest movement from his side, within a breath's time, this place would be surrounded by 3 layers of people. Li Yi and the eldest princess were walking behind. He turned his head and looked at her. He asked, "How is the cooperation with the family of generals?" Li Emingzi said lightly, "It has just begun. The military provisions are very important. You have to visit the family of generals more often." "How about the academy? Is everything okay?" "Everything is as usual. Although it is a female academy, we still have to pay attention to it. If there is nothing else, we should hold more parent-teacher meetings to let the parents understand the situation. It will also put them at ease." The arrogant Lolita was always short-lived. After pestering Jingdi for a while, she pulled Yongning along to play. Jingdi had a few palace guards follow them, and their footsteps finally slowed down. Li Emingzi looked at the smile on his face and thought for a moment. She said, "If there is nothing important, father might as well rest outside the palace for a few days." Li Yi was right. The palace looked glorious, but it was actually a cage. When she was in the palace, she had never seen her father show such a smile. Emperor Jing did not answer her. He looked at the group of children holding sugar-coated haws in their hands as they whizzed past the crowd. He shook his head and said, "When I was their age, I had already begun to study the scriptures. If I could let the children of poor families have books to read, the talents of the Jing kingdom would be inexhaustible in the future." Li Yi knew that the old emperor had wanted to break the situation where the court was almost controlled by the aristocratic families. From a long time ago, he had intentionally supported the students of poor families. However, due to various reasons, the results were very little. In this era, educational resources were very precious. They were often monopolized by the large clans with deep foundations. It was not easy for the poor to study. This directly led to the imperial court choosing officials from the aristocratic families. Only they had the ability to nurture outstanding disciples. However, this would cause the court to be filled with factions and complicated relationships. The court would be firmly controlled by the aristocratic families. This was not what a wise emperor wanted to see. For a wise emperor like the old emperor, what he was most concerned about was the poor people and the students of poor families. Li Yi crossed his arms and touched Mingzhu's shoulder. This was a rare opportunity. He had told her in detail how to support the children of poor families and break the monopoly of the aristocratic families in education. If he were to bring it up now, wouldn't he be saying it to the old emperor's heart? He had explained these routines clearly, and they only needed to follow the steps step by step. Emingzi glanced at him and thought that he was careless. She lowered her head and continued to think. Li Yi touched her again. Emingzi was still unmoved. Li Yi frowned and turned to look at her. This time he used a little more force. Emingzi finally turned to look at him. When she saw that he was staring at her, she seemed to have thought of something. She blushed and glared at him. Then she put some distance between them. This was a good opportunity to show off her talents in front of the old emperor. Li Yi wanted to talk to her about serious matters. What was with this blushing expression? What was this woman thinking about? Whether it was on the surface or in the dark, he had done enough for her. However, he couldn't always be the one to take the initiative, right? He was working himself to the bone, but she was enjoying herself up there. How could this be? She should at least take the initiative, right? Chapter 758. Hey, you have to move yourself. Ba, do you still remember the story I told you last time? Li Yi felt that he was facing a blockhead who could not understand anything. He looked at her and asked with a frown. Emingzi looked at him in confusion. What story? Li Yi reminded her. Wu. Mingzhu's heart skipped a beat. She subconsciously reached out to cover his mouth. She looked around and said, "Don't ever say such rebellious words again." Seeing that her father did not hear it, even if he heard the word Wu, he would not think of anything. This was a secret between the two of them. Only then did she feel slightly relieved. That matter could not be made known to outsiders, and even more so to his father. What are you thinking about all day? Li Yi pushed her hand away and looked at her unhappily. He said, "Open the imperial examination, put the poor in important positions, fill the court with gentlemen, and replace the aristocratic families. This is to share His Majesty's burden, not for you to imitate that woman. You didn't forget what I told you, did you?" Emingzi shook her head. She looked at him and nodded as if she understood. Her father had been putting the poor in important positions, replacing the aristocratic families, and letting the young scholars from poor families enter the center of the court. In the face of aristocratic politics, the poor had always been suppressed. After entering the court, they would be loyal to the royal family, which could effectively change the current situation in the court. Her father had done some things in response to this, including establishing a mathematics academy and recruiting a large number of commoners. However, she knew that there were more things that could be done to further expand the advantages of the commoners. In the end, it could turn into the kind of situation that Li Yi described, where the court was filled with noblemen and the rivers were clear. Because these things were related to the woman surnamed Wu. This was something she did not dare to think about normally. At this moment, with Li Yi's reminder, she understood that a method was a method after all. It worked in that fictional story and it could have the same effect in reality. A woman's mind was really hard to guess. Even if Li Yi never thought of the eldest princess as a woman, he still couldn't guess her thoughts. Fortunately, she finally understood his meaning. Li Yi took the tonghulu that the proud Lolita handed over. As he ate, he watched Princess Royal walk over and talk to Jing Emperor in a low voice. After eating 2 candied haws, he felt that something was wrong. Sour and sweet was what candied haws should taste like. The 2 candied haws he ate didn't taste sweet, only sour. When he looked down, it turned out that the sugar had already been licked clean. When he turned around, he saw that Sundara lowly covering her mouth and giggling at him. This little girl was becoming more and more impudent. After listening to Mingzhu's narration, Jing Emperor's eyebrows raised slightly. Then he shook his head and said, "Opening a large number of official schools can allow more poor students to study, but the cost is too great. It's so great that the imperial court cannot afford it." There were some methods that he had already decided on after weighing them in his heart. However, when it came to finances, he still had to hesitate. Although the national treasury had a lot of income in the past few days, it was not to the extent that it could be squandered wantonly. Wars, natural disasters. There were many places that needed money. It was not easy to maintain the balance and it could not be easily broken. Li Yi said solemnly, "No matter how poor we are, we can't be poor in education. No matter how bitter we are, we can't let our children suffer. They are the future of a country. They are related to the rise and fall of the country. They are like the sun in the morning, full of vigor and infinite potential. Now the Jing kingdom is ours, but the future of the Jing kingdom is still in their hands." Jing Emperor never despised the theory of governance that came from Li Yi's mouth. Moreover, these words were indeed what he was thinking. A large part of the reason why the imperial court was controlled by the aristocratic families was that they had a monopoly on education and books. It was too difficult for poor children to enter the imperial court without going through these aristocratic families. They could only rely on themselves. If all the children of poor families in the world could go to school and have books to read, this problem that had existed for thousands of years would be resolved in this dynasty. And this would be the first step for him to completely end the aristocratic politics. However, he did not have much time. It was still unknown whether he could completely eliminate some things in his lifetime. Jing Emperor shook his head and said, "I have also vigorously promoted the prefectural schools and the county schools. But you are not in the position to know how much it costs. A problem that can be solved with money is not a problem." Li Yi looked at Emingzu and asked, "Your Highness, don't you think so?" The national treasury could not take out the extra money, but the Princess Royal could. It was useless for her to earn so much money. It was impossible for her to save all of it for her dowry. It would be better to build more Emming's Hope primary schools. At least, it would let the poor in the world remember her kindness. The plaque on the school should be custom-made and big, so that everyone would know that it was the Princess Royal who pitted them that they could study. What's more, she did not have to pay for this money. Li Yi had a plan in his heart. Maybe he could save more dowry for her so that they would not be friends in vain. Emmingze looked at him in a daze. She did not know what Li Yi was thinking, but she was sure that he was thinking about something. Jing Emperor did not delve into this issue because the Tsundra Lolita had already pulled him to the brothel to watch the show. Emmingze crossed her arms and looked at him. What do you want to do? Eat the Emperor's salary and share the Emperor's worries. Li Yi did not go in. He leaned against the wall of the brothel and said, Your Majesty has been supporting the poor. This is to solve the problem from the root. Emmingze thought about it and blinked her eyes. Do you have a salary? Li Yi thought carefully for a moment and found that he really did not have a salary. He did not have much money and it was deducted because he got into trouble. The old emperor did not give him a salary at all. Then forget it. Li Yi waved his hand and was ready to go in to watch the show. He didn't even have a salary, so how could he worry about it? Whoever wanted to divide it, divide it. In the end, he did not step in and was grabbed by the eldest princess. Father's biggest headache is those big families that control the court. If we can help Father share this worry, I will ask Father to leave the palace to recuperate. Father should agree. Emmingze looked at him and said in a soft voice, Tell me, what should we do? Li Yi looked at her and corrected her, It's you who will share it, not me. Emmingze shook her head. The same. She was her and he was himself. What did she mean by the same? It was a good conversation, but it suddenly became so ambiguous. It made the thin-skinned Li Yi blush. Li Yi looked at her. What should we do? Didn't you say it very clearly? Emmingze looked down. But the national treasury doesn't have that much silver. Who said we need to use the national treasury's silver? In their dreams. Li Yi pursed his lips. It was a rare opportunity. Of course, the fertile water would not flow into other people's fields. I don't have that much money. Emmingze shook her head. Then she seemed to have thought of something and looked at Li Yi. Li Yi quickly waved his hand. Don't look at me. My family's money doesn't grow on trees. It's not easy to earn money. He patted her shoulder out of habit and squinted his eyes. Don't worry. There will be silver. What should be, there will be. Seeing a certain light in his eyes, Li Mingzhu's heart suddenly relaxed and she became incomparably calm. Chapter 759. The opera being performed in the brothel was the classic, The Cowherd and the Weaver Maid. The Qiao festival was coming up in a few days, and this kind of opera was very popular. The brothel was not the busiest during the day, but there were many people inside. More than half of the seats were occupied. At night, the entire place would be filled with people. Everyone's attention was attracted by the wonderful performance on the stage. No one noticed that in a secluded corner at the back, a pretty girl was excitedly telling the story of the cowherd and the weaver maid to a middle-aged man behind her. Although the opera was wonderful, the story told by the man was even more wonderful. The middle-aged man sat there, patiently listening to the girl. In his arms was a young girl. Occasionally he would look at the stage with a satisfied smile on his face. A gray-robed old man stood behind him. His wrinkled face remained expressionless from start to finish. Outside the brothel, a young man and a young woman leaned against the wall and whispered to each other. When the time comes, there will be official schools in various places. They will be called Emmingzhu Academy or Emmingzhu Hope Academy. Students from poor families will be given a certain amount of subsidies, or they can do some chores in the academy or work part-time. The curriculum must be reasonable and they must be well-rounded. We don't want to cultivate a bunch of rotten scholars. I will write a detailed report for you when I get back and you can submit it to the emperor. Li Yi looked at her and reminded, Remember, you are the only one who can do these things. As for how to get the money, I won't tell you until the matter is settled. The education reform in the Jing kingdom had already begun on a small scale. Li Yi was not worried that these changes would cause opposition. The old emperor already had the ability to judge. The old emperor had wanted to make a move against the aristocratic families for a long time, but the inside story was not that simple. Li Yi ate with him every day and he learned a lot from him in other aspects. The fact that the court was controlled by the aristocratic families had always been a thorn in the old emperor's heart. He wanted to use the children from poor families to cultivate officials who were absolutely loyal to the royal family to achieve his goal of centralizing power. Although the emperor had great power, he could not do whatever he wanted. He would be a fatuous emperor if he dismissed an official without a good reason, and he would not be able to convince the public. A family like the Cui family was far inferior to the imperial family in terms of military strength. However, it was impossible for the old emperor to send troops to destroy them just because he didn't like them. That was the behavior of bandits. The influence of the great clans was too great, especially to the officials who were attached to them. Touching them without a reason was tantamount to committing a crime. However, he couldn't just watch as these people stirred up trouble in the court and formed cliques for personal gain. The Cui family was a perfect example. Li Yi felt that the king of Shu, the eldest son of the royal family, was banished to that place because the old emperor couldn't stand the sight of the Cui family. The ones he had always wanted to deal with were the magnates led by the Cui family. Thinking about it, the Cui family had also committed a sin. They had just lost a few million taels of silver, and the coffin itself had probably been used up. Furthermore, the emperor was always thinking about them. What an unlucky year. After listening to him, Mingzu nodded and suddenly asked, "Why does it have to be me?" Li Yi pursed his lips. "This is a great contribution. Of course, we should not let the goodies flow to outsiders." "So I'm not an outsider? We are the three heroes of the capital. We share blessings and misfortunes. Of course, we think of you first when there's something good. It's too distant to call us outsiders. At least we can be considered as half an insider, right?" Mingzu glared at him. "Bah, who's your insider?" It was obviously a very pure meaning, but she had to misunderstand. Li couldn't be bothered to explain. He only felt that the princess was not straightforward at all today. She was wishy-washy and like a woman. Something's still not right. Mingzu crossed her arms and stared straight at him. "Every time you're so attentive, something bad must be going on. When you speak, feel your conscience." Li looked at her and frowned. "Ask yourself, when have I ever harmed you?" When Li opened his mouth, he naturally looked in the direction of her conscience. Feeling his gaze, Mingzu thought of the bowl of soup she had just drunk. She felt uncomfortable all over. She put her hands down from her chest, but she didn't know where to put them. Finally, she looked at him in embarrassment and walked towards the brothel. How can one pacify the world if one's chest is not clear? Li shook his head. He felt that there must be a deeper meaning behind heaven's arrangement. At the very least, the eldest princess had taken the first step on the road to pacify the world. The old emperor had a lot of fun today. Li could see that the smile on his face had never stopped. In this half a day he was not the high and mighty ruler of a country, but just an ordinary father. He would let Yongning ride on his neck to watch the circus. He would also beam with joy when the Tsundra Lolita fed him a milk candy. He would walk on the streets for 4 hours, but he was still full of energy. When it was time for lunch, he even let Changda serve him 3 bowls of food. He didn't look like a seriously ill person at all. He could eat and walk and he was in a good state. Of course, the most important reason was that the food he cooked was delicious. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, he was still lying on Li Yi's rocking chair. He squinted his eyes and swayed back and forth. The eldest princess was massaging his shoulders from behind. Emperor Jing's face showed a satisfied expression. "I finally know why you would rather be idle at home than to enter the court and become an official. If you can be so comfortable every day, I wouldn't exchange it for a god." Li Yi tried hard not to show a contemptuous expression. He hadn't done anything yet, but his days were already comfortable. As the dignified ruler of a country, how could he act like a bumpkin who had never seen the world? No matter what, he should at least have afternoon tea and a few pieces of osmanthus cake to relieve his boredom. Emperor Jing closed his eyes and said faintly, "You're the one behind the Cui family's matter, right?" There was nothing to hide. The old emperor knew that the largest glass mine in the Jing kingdom was under his house. He couldn't hide it even if he wanted to. "Your Majesty, don't worry. The taxes that should be paid will not be less." It was a good habit to pay taxes. It was also a hush money. The old emperor had been unhappy with the Cui family for a long time. Since he could vent his anger and get money, he certainly wouldn't have any objection. "It's getting late. It's time to go back to the palace." Emperor Jing opened his eyes and stood up from the rocking chair. He didn't mention this matter until he left with Yongning and Shaning. When the eldest princess left, she looked back at him. Li knew what it meant. Sometimes he really hoped that she was a man. In this way, a lot of unnecessary trouble could be avoided. But when he thought that she was really a man, he felt a little disappointed. A long time ago he already had a plan and was carrying it out step by step. However, the road ahead was difficult and dangerous. It had not really manifested until now. Moreover, even if he overcome all the difficulties and obstacles and achieved the result he expected, was that result really what she wanted? In fact, Li Yi's heart was still a little confused. She has already left. Why are you still looking? A faint voice came from the side. Li Yi turned around and saw Mississippi Lu holding her sword and leaning against the moon door. Who won just now? When Li Yi was cooking, the old emperor and the two little girls were playing in the front yard. Mississippi Lu and the eldest princess went to the backyard. When she came out alone, her clothes were a little messy. Not surprisingly, they should have sparred for a while. After all, among the people of the same age, only the two of them could be each other's opponents. Mississippi Lu didn't answer, which meant that she didn't win. It seemed to be the same result last time. For Mississippi Lu, who had always swept away her peers, it might be a little hard to accept that she couldn't win against another girl of the same age. Especially in a situation where she couldn't win in terms of appearance and strength. Girls of this age like to compete in everything. Li Yi could understand. He looked at her and comforted her. Don't be discouraged. At least you are older than her. Mississippi Lu looked up at him with a trace of doubt in her eyes. What did you say? I said, you seem to be a few days older than her? Li Yi looked at her and smiled. I made soup. Do you want to drink some? Chapter 760. Recently, Li Yi was keen on making soup. This work was not as simple as putting a bunch of ingredients in water to boil. The proportion of various ingredients, the amount of water, the heat, the time, and changing any of the parameters, the taste might change qualitatively. In this aspect he was already very experienced. Of course, the love poured into the soup could not be described by the amount. Rui's soup nourished the fetus, and Xiaohuan's soup was beneficial to the growth of puberty girls. Although Mississippi Lu did not need to grow any more, it was not bad to drink more. The one who needed to grow the most was actually the eldest princess more than Xiaohuan. Therefore, when Li Yi entered the palace, he brought her a full cup. Eating egg fried rice with a delicious soup that could nourish one's body would be better. Eating egg fried rice with wine didn't sound like a good thing. How is it? This soup tastes good, right? Egg fried rice was a little greasy, and this soup could relieve the greasy feeling. More importantly, it could also grow the body. Mingzi nodded. Soup with rice was indeed better, but after experiencing something, whenever soup was mentioned she would think of something that made people blush. She looked at Li Yi with some vigilance and asked, this soup? What's the use? To relieve greasy feeling, it's not good to drink all the time. Li Yi looked at her and said indifferently, don't worry, it's not poisonous. As he spoke, he poured himself a bowl and started to drink by himself. Mingzhu's doubts disappeared, but she felt a little guilty. She really should not have doubted him just now. Li Yi took out a piece of paper and said, this is for you. Li Mingzhu took it and looked at it. She found that what was written on it was exactly what he had told her yesterday. It was just that it was more organized and clear. As for the more specific and detailed things, he had deliberately omitted them. Just hand it over like this. Li Yi was worried that she would blurt out all the details on her own, so he reminded her of something else. Mingzi did not ask much. She knew that he did this for a reason. This matter was beneficial to the country and the people. He would not harm her. Mingzi looked at him and asked, how do you get the money? It's a secret for now. Li Yi didn't tell her directly, not because he didn't trust her, but because he trusted her too much. This silly girl's kung fu was quite powerful, but her mind was actually very simple. She could not hide anything in her heart. If he really solved all the problems and then revealed everything, what would they have to do with it? I'm leaving. I'll come find you in a few days. Li Yi waved his hand and leisurely walked out of the morning dew hall. County Marquis Li treats His Highness very well, the figure standing behind Mingzi suddenly said when he saw Li Yi walk out. What she meant was not limited to him bringing the princess's favorite food every time he came. In fact, the things he did for the princess were much more than that. He made a princess, a woman, step by step become an existence that even the men in the court could not underestimate. No one dared to question why the eldest princess of the Jing kingdom was still not married, and no one questioned why she could become the dean of the women's college. She led a group of noble ladies in the capital and did many things that men could not do. She also let those people know what it meant to be a woman not inferior to a man. Mingzi did not directly respond. She looked out of the hall and finished the egg fried rice. After drinking a bowl of soup, she put down the jade spoon and said, there is still some soup left. I can't drink it. Nanny, drink it. Don't waste it. The old woman smiled. She knew that Emingzi did not want to waste County Marquis Li's kindness. She took a bowl and scooped out the last bowl of soup. After drinking a mouthful, she smacked her lips. Her expression suddenly froze. Before the princess was born, she had always been by the empress's side. She had personally served the empress for more than 10 years and watched the empress grow from a little girl to a woman. Naturally, she knew what this familiar taste of the soup had. Emingzi looked at her with some confusion and asked, "What's wrong?" The old woman put down the bowl and looked at her meaningfully. She said, "This soup is only useful for His Highness to drink. I'd better not drink it." It was late at night. The hall of diligent government was silent. Occasionally there was the sound of pages turning. Changde walked out of the shadows. He coughed lightly and reminded, "Your Majesty, it's time to rest." "Changde, tell me, am I really old?" Emperor Jing put down a memorial. It was hard to tell whether his expression was gratified or lonely. "Your Majesty is in the prime of your life." "Why do you say that?" Changde's voice finally had some emotion. "If Emingzi was a man, why would I do this today?" Emperor Jing seemed to be talking to himself. He picked up the memorial and read it again carefully. Everything was clear and extremely comprehensive. He couldn't help but murmur, "These were all thought of by Emingzi alone? That boy is right. I am indeed old. The future of the Jing kingdom is still in the hands of these young people." At this moment, Changde roughly guessed what he meant. In terms of writing poems and lyrics, His Majesty was not as good as County Earl Li. In terms of martial arts, His Majesty was not as good as the eldest princess. However, His Majesty had always been good at governing the country. When one day he found that he was not as good as others in these matters, it was not strange for him to sigh like he did just now. Changde thought for a while and said, "Her Royal Highness is also worried about His Majesty. I'm afraid that County Earl Li also contributed a lot. It's not the first time that he gave all the credit to Emingzi." A trace of anger appeared on Emperor Jing's face. He said, "This brat, if he had taken out these things earlier, I wouldn't have had a headache for so long." As Emperor Jing spoke, he waved his hand and said, "Forget it. Leave this matter to Emingzi. I'm also happy to be idle." He was very confident in Mingzhu's ability. Since this matter was proposed by her, he would leave it to her. In this way he would also be much more relaxed. The most important issue was the funding. The higher-ups only said that there was no need to allocate funds from the national treasury. As for where the huge sum of money would come from, he didn't care so much. Someone would always have a way. As if thinking of something, Emperor Jing suddenly said, "Do you think he has any thoughts about Emingzi? If Li Yi didn't have a wife, he would even think it was a good thing. But it was impossible for a princess of a country to be a concubine. Her Royal Highness and he have known each other for a long time. He is also indebted to her." Changde thought for a while and said, "As for other things, it shouldn't be." Naturally, he couldn't say much about this kind of thing. With Mingzhu's age, if it was another princess, she would have gotten married long ago. But she always has her own ideas. I don't know her thoughts, so I can't help her decide. If it was someone else, it wouldn't matter, but that brat. Emperor Jing frowned. After muttering a few words, he shook his head and showed a relaxed smile on his face. "It's getting late. Let's rest." Although there was still some loneliness in her heart, this was the child's heart. The child had grown up and could finally help her father share some things. "It's done?" Li Yi looked at Emingzi and couldn't help but ask. Emingzi didn't speak but nodded. Although he didn't know why she didn't seem to be in a good mood and the way she looked at him was a little strange, it was always worth being happy that the plan had taken a big step forward. Drink soup, drink soup." Li Yi filled another bowl for her. Emingzi looked at him and there was a trace of shame and anger on her face. She lowered her head slightly. Seeing that she didn't seem to want to drink, Li Yi was stunned. Then he shook his head and didn't care about it. He said, "Forget it, I will bring it back for Xiao Huan to drink. The food is still complete. I will also bring this soup bowl back. The next time I come, I will return it." After all, whether the Princess Royal grew up or not had little to do with him. The little servant girl was in the puberty period and her nutrition had to keep up. Seeing him stand up and prepare to leave, Mingzhu's face showed the same color as a peach blossom. She gritted her teeth and said, "Put it down." Chapter 761. The Emperor's condition seemed to have improved. The morning court, which had not been held for a long time, reopened today. This was the first time in several months. The officials were in high spirits and did not dare to be negligent. They stood in front of the palace gates before dawn, waiting. The morning court had not been held for a long time. Originally, they thought that there would be a lot of important matters accumulated. They did not know when it would end today. However, in less than an hour, all the officials lined up and walked out of the political hall. The emperor's body might not be able to hold on. Even in the past, it was rare to end a meeting so early. 2 provinces had been hit by floods half a month ago. The losses were not small. The emperor ordered the Ministry of Revenue to allocate silver as soon as possible for disaster relief. He also sent officials from the Imperial Water Surveillance to deal with the floods. This should be the most urgent matter. However, similar disasters were experienced almost every year. There would not be any big mistakes if they were done step by step. After that, it was some trivial matters of the various departments. Since it was the morning court, something had to be said. Otherwise, it would be awkward for everyone to stand there and make it seem like they had no work to do. In addition, he ordered the Ministry of Rights to assist the princess in supervising the construction of the county schools. There was also a small reform of the imperial examinations. It was something that everyone was concerned about. Although he had failed many times, the emperor did not seem to have given up on the suppression of some powerful families. There was still a long distance from the political hall to the yamen of the various departments. The officials gathered in 2s and 3s and discussed the matters of the morning court. Daxing County School. His Majesty is opening the door to the poor again? Didn't they do this a few years ago? In the end, it was still left unsettled. It's difficult. If we want to build more academies for the provinces, we need to hire more teachers, ink, paper, and books. We haven't even counted the academies. All of this requires silver. Can the national treasury take out that much? Who knows? The emperor didn't say that it would be from the national treasury. He only said that the eldest princess would be in charge of this matter. Can the eldest princess take out so much silver? If it was a year or half a year ago, the focus of their debate would be that although the princess was of noble status, she was only a woman. What right did she have to participate in national affairs? However, at this moment, no one dared to say this. The last person who had questioned her had his spine broken by the people of the capital. A great scholar of a generation ended up being disgraced and his reputation destroyed. Countless people would sigh when they thought of it. In this year, the eldest princess's brilliance was too dazzling. She had brought back Tianfa and helped the Jing kingdom defeat the Qi kingdom. Even now, the Jing kingdom was still deeply intimidated. Later on, she had defeated the envoy of the Qi kingdom and saved the face of the country. Later on, the Women's Union and the Women's Academy had even promoted the national policy of not marrying before the age of 16. They had trained female midwives, which reduced the chances of a woman dying from dystocia by several times. All of these things were enough to convinced. Up until now, they wouldn't be surprised if the eldest princess's shadow appeared in court affairs. But as for whether she could handle this matter well, no one had any expectations in their hearts. After all, even His Majesty had encountered irresistible obstacles in this matter, let alone the eldest princess, a woman. Not to mention other obstacles, just the amount of silver needed was not a small amount. If she couldn't solve this problem, it would be a joke. Perhaps it was because they saw through this that the officials with deep backgrounds didn't show any displeased expression. Supporting the poor was naturally suppressing the influential families. His Majesty's display of this intention showed that he was dissatisfied with them. The big families, who had always been close to the royal family, were not afraid. Their status in the court was guaranteed by the royal family. But for the Chui family and other families, things were not so simple. At least in the current court, they were not so stable. An official said in a low voice, "These years, the court has changed a lot. Is His Majesty still not satisfied?" "Don't worry. Haven't we already experienced such things?" A middle-aged man next to him showed a disdainful smile and said, "This time there will be no end. Even His Majesty can't do it." Eldest princess, ha. Yeah, the most important thing is where the silver comes from. One person nodded and said, "If it's only in the capital, it won't affect the overall situation. But if it covers all the provinces, I'm afraid the national treasury won't be able to afford it. I'd like to see what eldest princess plans to use to fill this bottomless pit." Haha, Her Royal Highness's business is doing well, but this time, the shining silver is destined to go down the drain. As soon as one person said this, he was pulled by the arm by the person next to him. The person's gaze was extremely obscure. That person looked back and saw the gloomy face of one of the important figures of the Chui family. His heart immediately thumped and he thought, "This is bad." Wasn't mentioning this in front of the Chui family rubbing salt in their wounds? Everyone knew that the Chui family had suffered heavy losses because of the glass incident. The exhibition was not held and the glass they had hoarded was smashed to pieces in front of everyone. According to insiders, this time the Chui family would probably lose millions of taels of silver. In terms of losses, who could compete with the Chui family? Not daring to look at that official Chui again, he looked back at the eldest princess who had just walked out. A strange look appeared in his eyes and he quickly walked forward. It seems that no one is optimistic about you. Li Yi rarely attended court today. He walked beside Mingzu. With his current hearing ability, it was not difficult for him to hear what the people in front of him were talking about. For the eldest princess it was even less difficult. Just watch. Mingzu looked back at him and said lightly. Li Yi heard this and was stunned. He didn't know whether he should be touched or helpless. This matter had been arranged in front of hundreds of officials. There was no way back. The silver had not been settled yet, but she was actually not anxious at all. She didn't think, what if he was bragging? However, the feeling of being trusted was not bad. Li Yi looked back at her and comforted her. Don't worry. If you don't have money you can cheat some more. What did you say? Mingzu looked back at him. I said if you don't have money you can earn some more. Li Yi looked at her and said with a smile, you also know that I am very good at making money. This little money is just for sprinkling water. There seemed to be someone waiting in front. When he saw the two coming, he bowed slightly and said, Your Highness. Then he looked at Li Yi and nodded slightly. Li Yi also smiled back. The head of the Wang family was an old friend who had friendly cooperation with him. Mingzi looked at him and asked, May I know what's the matter, official Wang? The relationship between the Wang family and the royal family had always been close. Although she was a princess, she would not be too arrogant in front of the head of the Wang family. Your Highness wants to build the county school. It is a good thing for the country and the people. The Wang family is willing to donate 100,000 taels of silver to contribute to this matter. 100,000 taels of silver was not a small amount. When Li Yi gave it to Mississippi Liu, he hesitated for a moment. The Wang family actually took it out so easily. They were indeed the wealthiest family in the Jing kingdom. They were full of confidence. However, thinking of how much they had earned these days, it was normal for them to take out some money to show their love. Mingzu was also stunned when she heard this. Then she said with a smile, I appreciate the Wang family's kindness. However, I have already made arrangements for this matter. There is no need for official Wang to worry. She knew that Li Yi did not want others to interfere in this matter. Moreover, he had just said that the money was just a sprinkle of water to him. Sprinkle of water should mean that it was not worth mentioning, right? The head of the Wang family was only surprised for a moment. Then he smiled and said, In that case I will leave first. Li Yi turned his head and looked at her in a daze. His face was full of disbelief. Being stared at by him and thinking of the effects of the soup, Mingzu felt that a certain part of her body was a little strange. This feeling was unprecedented. She blushed and asked, Why are you looking at me? Li Yi touched his forehead with one hand, and reached out with the other to touch hers. She did not have a fever. Could it be that after drinking too much of that soup, a certain part of her body would grow and her intelligence would decrease? What are you doing? Mingzu swatted his hand away and said angrily. Li Yi had no time to admire the eldest princess's rare angry look. He took off and chased after the head of the Wang family. Official Wang, wait, don't go, let's discuss what happened just now. Old Wang, stop. Chapter 762. Luz, you, why are you so? Li Yi bade farewell to the master of the Wang family. When he walked back, he looked at Mingzu and said with disappointment, 200,000 taels of silver, how many academies can be built, how many pens and papers can be bought, and how many teachers can be hired? How can you just reject it like that? In the end, he did not say the word wastrel. After all, she was not Mississippi Liu, and it was not her family that was going to lose. But strictly speaking, this matter was jointly proposed by the two of them. It was the crystallization of their love, and it was their child. As a father, he had the right to fight for more and better benefits for his child. What did you say to Lord Wang just now? Mingzi looked at him and asked in confusion. When the master of the Wang family left just now, his face was full of smiles and he was obviously in a good mood. She could not think of a reason that could make the person who gave out 100,000 taels of silver so happy. Then she realized another problem. Looking at Li Yi, she asked uncertainly, You just said, 200,000 taels of silver? The Wang family has already agreed to donate 200,000 taels of silver. Li Yi waved his hand and said, But don't make this matter known for now. Doesn't His Majesty want the Ministry of Rites to help you? Let them first. Will this work? Emingzi looked at him and asked with a frown. If this was the method he was talking about, then this matter would probably encounter unimaginable resistance. Of course not. Li looked at her and said, "Do you think others are as stupid as the Wang family? Why should they give us money for nothing? I have already made a list for you. When the time comes, let the officials of the Ministry of Rites visit them one by one. They will definitely not donate money. But you don't have to be angry. This is all in our plan. If you want to hear it, I will tell you now." Emingzi waved her hand and said, "Next time. I have to accompany my mother later. I will leave first." Li Yi had originally planned to tell her all the plans. Hearing this, he was slightly startled and looked at her in surprise. Shouldn't she be eager to know all the plans? When did she become so unmotivated? She could help him once or twice or even 8 or 10 times, but she couldn't help him forever. This is such an important matter, can't you show a little bit of enthusiasm? The sound of her footsteps gradually faded away. Li Yi shook his head and stopped thinking about it. He shouted at her back, "The soup I brought for you is in the cafeteria. Don't forget to get it." With that, he walked towards the palace gate. Mingzhu's body trembled and she stopped in her tracks. An unnatural blush appeared on her face. Originally, he wanted to spend a few days in peace in the future and not care about the matters in the court. But sometimes he couldn't stay idle. Fortunately, he was only helping the eldest princess with these things. He just gave her some ideas and the rest was up to her. Li Yi's skill in making soup had improved by leaps and bounds. He would change it every day. Yesterday he had heard Xiao Huan and Rui say that her chest had been warm recently. Was she sick? She was too embarrassed to tell him these words. Li Yi could only tactfully tell her through Rui that it was normal for a girl to feel this way when she was growing. Xiao Huan was almost 17. In another 2 years, the little servant girl would become the senior servant girl. Of course, making soup was just a hobby for a while. What he liked to do the most was to sit in front of Rui after giving her a massage. He would put his ear on her lower abdomen and the two of them would talk about the private matters between husband and wife, including what name the child should be named and how to educate them. Of course, there was one point that the two of them tacitly agreed on. Whether it was a boy or a girl, they had to be skilled in both the pen and the sword. They didn't have to worry about this because they had a father who was skilled in both the pen and the sword. But if they wanted to learn martial arts, Rui would be reluctant to be too strict with them. If they wanted to succeed, they needed Mississippi Lu. But if she was too strict, it might scare the child. No, he had to think about it carefully. Many officials from the Ministry of Rites visited the officials and nobles in the capital one by one. They hoped that they could contribute to the development of education in the Jing Kingdom. They wanted to donate some money to build more academies so that the children who couldn't afford to study could have a chance to change their fate. The officials from the Ministry of Rites visited them personally. Out of understanding, they couldn't let them return empty-handed. Therefore, they really donated some silver. 100 taels, 200 taels, and 300 taels were considered too much. A minister only donated 50 taels. It was said that a minister-counselor of the Ministry of Rites walked around the Chui family and didn't even drink a cup of tea. It couldn't be said that they were stingy. After all, after the last audit, all the officials more or less donated money to the national treasury. Some even donated their family's wealth. It hadn't been that long. They couldn't ask the officials and nobles to donate money every time the court lacked money. After all, this wasn't a long-term plan. Even if they didn't donate money, they had a valid reason that everyone could understand. Moreover, the emperor supported the poor. It was a terrible idea to ask the people from the Ministry of Rites to go to the rich families or the families of the officials related to them to raise money. Even if they had money, they wouldn't donate it. Her Royal Highness was only a woman after all. They thought she would have some brilliant plan, but according to the current situation, this matter was nothing more than a joke in the end. Even the Ministry of Rites had advised the emperor that they didn't want to participate in this matter anymore. Not only were they unpopular, they couldn't raise money, so it would be futile. They were usually very busy with work and didn't need to waste time on these things. Sing Shichen sat on the stone bench and held a cup of hot tea in his hand. He slowly said, "Although the eldest princess is powerful, she is still a woman. How can she easily solve something that even the emperor can't do?" Now, his treatment here had changed from herbal tea to hot tea. This was a great improvement for him. Although the woman across from him still didn't want to talk to him and it was almost all him talking alone, after the court session, being able to sit here and talk for a while, even if it was just talking to himself, talking about some things in the court or old events, even if he didn't get any response, it was enough to calm his heart. Tseng Zumo's eyelashes fluttered and she suddenly said, "Her Royal Highness is an extraordinary woman. Maybe she really has a way." Her tone inevitably had a different meaning. Even if Her Royal Highness had no way, there would be someone who would help her find a way and help her solve all the problems properly and perfectly. There was no doubt about this. Because he was always like that. Ahem ahem. The sudden voice startled Tseng Shichen and he almost choked on the tea in his mouth. He raised his head in disbelief. This was the first time she had taken the initiative to talk to him for so many days. He wiped the corner of his mouth with his sleeve. After coming back to his senses, he hurriedly said, "Yes, yes, Her Royal Highness has created many miracles. Maybe this time, everyone will be impressed." In 3 days she raised 2,000 taels. Emperor Jing rubbed his eyebrows and looked down. He said, "The Ministry of Rites is quite dissatisfied with this. They think this is too absurd. Mingzu, what do you think?" The slender figure standing below thought for a moment and said, "In that case, there is no need to trouble the Ministry of Rites anymore. Father, rest assured I will think of a way." A curious expression appeared on Emperor Jing's face. Even with the Wang family's 200,000 taels, it is far from enough. What do you think? Tell me. Mingzi looked up at him and said softly, "He didn't say, who?" Emperor Jing was stunned for a moment before he seemed to understand something. He waved his hand and said, "Father knows. You can go now." Seeing Mingzi walk out of the door, Emperor Jing sighed and leaned back in his chair. He sighed and said, "I am old. It seems that I am really old." Changde came out and asked, "Do you want me to bring him here?" "There is no need." Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "I don't care what method he uses to get so much money. Anyway, I don't have to worry about it. If things are not done well, be careful of his butt." Emperor Jing looked at the sky and said, "It is not early. It is not easy to rest early. Today, go to Concubine Yan's place." Changde nodded and a smile appeared on his old face. His Majesty had not rested so early for a long time. If that boy took the initiative, many political affairs would not need His Majesty to worry about. Unfortunately, Changde suddenly looked in the direction of the eldest princess's departure and thought. Chapter 763. There was a heated discussion in the capital these days, and the scope of the discussion was very wide. Even the poor farmers, who usually did not care much about state affairs, often went into the city to inquire about the construction of the academy. They heard that after the academy was built, the children of the poor would be able to study for free. Their children would be 7 years old next year. Would they be able to study in the academy in the future? The farmers who had eaten the last meal and had to worry about the next, should be most concerned about the problem of food. They had never cared about state affairs, and no matter what the higher-ups did, as long as they could eat their fill and survive in this world, that was the first thing they thought about when they woke up every day. But this time they had to be concerned. If what the eldest princess was doing was successful, their children would not have to repeat the life of their fathers like them. They could go to the academy to study and be scholars. In the future, if they could become the top scholar and become a high-ranking official, they would bring honor to their ancestors and their families. In their view, scholars were all going to become the top scholar and become a high-ranking official. Although Scholar Wu at the entrance of the village had not become the top scholar, everyone in the village who saw him had to respectfully call him Duke Scholar. In short, no matter what status they had in the past, as long as they studied, everything would be different. This was a joyous occasion. Her Royal Highness had done something good for them again. First, she had summoned her own daughter and allowed her entire family to have a full meal. Now she had even allowed their sons to study. They did not know how many things the current emperor had done for them, but Her Royal Highness was really speaking up for these poor commoners. Building an academy required money, and Her Royal Highness ran around to raise money for them. However, those rich officials did not seem to be willing, and it seemed that the matter of building an academy could not be carried out. This was the situation that they learned after entering the city. Their money isn't at all from the wealth of the people? They really want to do things for the commoners. All of them have become misers. An old farmer held onto his walking stick and kept hitting the ground, his face full of resentment. "This is an opportunity for the children, they can't be like us." Someone gritted his teeth and said, "They must study, only after studying can they have a future." One of them shook his head and sighed. "Sigh? They are all cruel and unscrupulous. The one who truly cares about the poor people is still the Princess Royal Highness." A carriage slowly passed by on the street. After all these days, the old man driving the carriage already understood that the wide road was always blocked by traffic. In order to not waste time, they had to take a long detour and take another clear path. Then he would stop at the entrance of an alley. Sometimes he would stop for a quarter of an hour and sometimes he would stop for as long as an hour. Fong and the sloppy old man sat on either side of the carriage, thinking about what they had just heard on the street. They lifted the curtain and said to Li Yi, "Young master, these officials are so stingy that they won't even pay this little bit of money." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Don't say that. Other people's money doesn't come from the strong wind, and they don't want to be blown away by the strong wind. It's their freedom to donate or not and we can't control it. Don't engage in moral coercion." Fong nodded, not fully understanding. Although he didn't know what moral coercion meant, he knew that his silver was picked up from the sand, sent to him by others and cheated from the Qi kingdom. It seemed that it was not as convenient as the strong wind, and he didn't want to give it to others for free. Li Yi jumped off the carriage and walked into the alley. The sloppy old man habitually threw a milk candy into his mouth and looked in a certain direction. How long is he going to do this? Fong took a candy from the sloppy old man's hand and murmured. The sloppy old man glanced at him, put the remaining milk candy back into his arms and asked, "Soon what?" Fong glanced at him and said, "Soon means soon." These days when the son-in-law passed by here, the expression on his face was completely different from before. He had carefully observed him for many days, and could naturally see some subtle emotions. The sloppy old man seemed to understand something and asked, "Say, between your family's young miss and the young lady in here, who do you think he likes more?" Fong looked at him in surprise. He didn't expect this eccentric old man to be so passionate on the inside, to be interested in this kind of thing. "There's no comparison." Fong shook his head and said, "The son-in-law likes the young miss because the young miss is the young miss and not someone else. He likes Miss Zeng because he likes her." "What do you mean?" The sloppy old man was stunned for a moment, and after pondering for a while, he still didn't understand. Then, as if he had thought of something, he looked at him with some mockery. "Are you talking about yourself?" Fong glanced at him. "What does that have to do with me? Don't think I don't know that you have a lover in the Jade's courtyard. Why didn't you go look for her today?" Fong's face suddenly changed and he said angrily, "You followed me." The sloppy old man looked at him disdainfully. "Who doesn't know about your trivial matters?" "Trivial matters?" Fong actually wasn't angry anymore. "Looking at you, I'm afraid you've never been liked by anyone before, right?" This sentence seemed to touch on the sloppy old man's reverse scale, and he immediately glared at Fong. "What? Why don't you go to the Wu kingdom and ask around?" When this old man was young, he could be considered elegant, and many women fell in love with him. "If it weren't for the fact that I was obsessed with martial arts." "So you never married in your life?" Fong looked at him with a smile. The sloppy old man didn't speak and narrowed his eyes at him. If it weren't for the fact that he had been cultivating his mind these days, he would have already smacked him with his palm. However, he couldn't casually smack this guy in front of him, so he didn't care about this. The sloppy old man thought for a while, and continued with the previous question. "What if your family's second miss is added?" "Second miss?" This question was a bit complicated. Fong was startled and looked up at the sky, feeling that today's sunlight was a bit dazzling. Li Yi sat at the stone table, took a sip of tea and asked, "The Cui family's ready-made clothing stores are all closed, right?" Zheng Zumo looked up at him and nodded slightly. These days she had also faintly heard some news that the Cui family had lost a lot of money and mortgaged many stores in the capital, including those ready-made clothing stores which hadn't been opened for a long time. These days they had also made some adjustments to their strategy. Even if there were more counterfeits, there would be corresponding countermeasures. "I heard that the eldest princess encountered some obstacles in building the Silver Academy?" Li Yi thought she would ask specifically about the closure of the Cui family's ready-made clothing stores. He didn't know why she suddenly brought it up. He shook his head and said, "Those are all appearances. Everything is going according to plan." Zheng Zumo looked at him and asked, "Did you plan it?" "Of course, I didn't expect them to donate much money. The less they donate, the better. They are laughing at the eldest princess now, but they won't be able to laugh in a few days." After Li Yi finished speaking, he saw that she lowered her head and didn't speak. He thought for a moment and suddenly asked, "Are you jealous?" He Mrs. Jealous." Xiao Chui stood behind and said with a chuckle. Ever since she saw the two of them rolling on the bed that day, she could say some things in front of the two of them. The two of them were on the bed, one on top of the other. According to common sense, during the time she couldn't see, they should be rolling around. "Xiao Chui, shut up. Zheng Zimo looked at Xiao Chui angrily, stood up and hurried to the studio. Li Yi stood up and gently knocked on Xiao Chui's head. How can you talk about your own miss like that? How impudent! Xiao Chui covered her head, feeling wronged. Chapter 764. When Li Yi pushed the door open again and walked out, he habitually held Xiao Chui's head with his hand. He knew that she had the habit of leaning on the door to eavesdrop. If she suddenly lost her support, it was very likely that she would fall to the ground. The girl was, after all, thin-skinned. After being caught again, she looked at Li Yi with some embarrassment. She blushed and said, "Li, are you leaving?" "I'm leaving." Li Yi patted her head and walked out of the courtyard. "Why don't you take your lover back and let her stay in the brothel alone? Do you feel at ease?" Next to the carriage, the sloppy old man was chattering. "Could it be that you are afraid of your wife, as they say?" Fang did not pay attention to the sloppy old man because he was still thinking about the question just now. Although he now boasted that he was a smart person, especially towards the son-in-law, he could see very clearly from the perspective of an outsider. However, the old man's question just now made it difficult for him to answer. Li Yi got on the carriage and said, "Let's go to the palace." Fang sniffed and smelled a faint fragrance. He shook his head and waved his whip. The carriage slowly moved. When Li Yi stepped into the imperial garden, Jingdi was playing chess with the proud Lolita. Maybe it was because there was nothing to be busy with political affairs, but the old emperor was more and more leisurely and elegant recently. The proud Lolita no longer played chess with others. She had already understood that the rules of the chess were set by herself. She was invincible in the palace. Even if Li Yi met her, he would have to retreat. They were playing 5 in a row. Li Yi stood by and watched for a while. He couldn't help but sigh. The proud Lolita's thinking was really quick. It seemed that she had a high talent in all kinds of chess. When Jingdi put a black piece in a position that he thought was suitable, the proud Lolita had already put it down. Then she said with a smile, "Father, you lost again. Today I can go out of the palace to play." Jingdi waved his hand helplessly and said, "Shanning, you go play first. Father wants to say a few words to the teacher." The arrogant Lolita stood up, winked at Li Yi and ran away quickly. Emperor Jing pointed to the chessboard in front of him and stretched out his hand. "Let's play?" Since he couldn't beat that Sundra Loli, did he think he couldn't beat him? Emperor Jing was still holding a black chess piece. He placed a chess piece in the center of the chessboard and said, "What are you doing here instead of solving the problem of the academy?" Li Yi didn't bother with pleasantries and went straight to the point. "I would like to ask for 2 paintings from your majesty." "My calligraphy?" A surprised expression appeared on Emperor Jing's face. Although he was not considered a master of calligraphy, he was still the ruler of a country. His calligraphy treasures were not inferior to any other masters in terms of value. He would often give them to some meritorious officials, but this was the first time someone had directly asked him for it. Naturally, he didn't think that Li Yi liked his calligraphy. In the entire Jing kingdom, the number of people who could surpass him in calligraphy could be counted on one hand. The first thought that came to his mind was that Li Yi wanted to sell it for money. "If you win against me, I will give it to you." These days, the only thing that could trouble him was the matter of the academy. However, with Emingzu and Li Yi around, he didn't have to worry about it anymore. He simply played chess to kill time. Compared to the Tsundra Loli, Emperor Jing's level of playing Gamoku was still very high, even though he hadn't been exposed to this form of chess for a long time. With something on his mind, Li Yi naturally couldn't concentrate on playing chess. His level of Gamoku could only be said to be average. Moreover, this was not something that could be achieved by digesting a few chess records. There were also various accidental factors. At this time he was absent-minded and lost 3 games in a row. When he collected the chess pieces again, Emperor Jing glanced at him and said lightly, "Be more serious. If you can't beat me today, don't even think about the calligraphy." The matter of the academy had almost fermented enough. It was time to move on to the next step of the plan. Li Yi also planned to find the eldest princess after getting his calligraphy. The 2 of them would go out of the palace to do something. Just now they had already wasted a lot of time. There was no time to play chess with him, especially when he was at a disadvantage after more than half of the chess pieces were gone. He knew that he couldn't go on like this. It was time to show his real skills. So he raised his head and stared at the sky behind Emperor Jing. Emperor Jing looked at the chessboard. Seeing that he didn't move for a long time, he thought that he was thinking. After waiting for a while, seeing that he still hadn't made a move, he raised his head and saw that Li Yi's eyes were staring straight ahead, as if there was something behind him. Emperor Jing looked back and saw that it was empty. He looked at Li Yi and asked doubtfully, "What are you looking at?" "There is a cloud there," Li Yi said. "What about the cloud?" Emperor Jing's voice was even more doubtful. "Cloud? Yes, what about the cloud? Isn't it just a cloud?" Li Yi shook his head and retracted his gaze. The chess piece in his hand finally fell on a certain position on the chessboard. He looked at Emperor Jing with a smile on his face. "Your Majesty, you have lost." Emperor Jing lowered his head and saw that the white chess pieces on the chessboard had already formed a 5-star alignment. He seemed to think of something and looked back at the sky behind him again. The sky was blue. Where did the cloud come from? He looked back at Li Yi and asked, "Where is the cloud you were talking about?" Li Yi looked at him in surprise and asked doubtfully, "What cloud?" In the end, the old emperor was willing to concede defeat and gave Li Yi what he wanted. He wanted a few more pieces and sold them when he was short of money in the future. However, the old emperor looked at him with a strange expression. He had to follow the original plan and let him write a few words before running away. Through this matter, he discovered another thing. The old emperor's chess skills were bad and he couldn't afford to lose. Li Yi rubbed the proud Lolita's head and said, "Be good. Today teacher and your royal sister have something to do and can't play with you. Just stay in the palace." "No, Yongning has been summoned by Her Highness. There is no one to play with me." The proud Lolita hugged Li Yi's arm and said with a sobbing tone, "I am alone in the palace. It is very lonely." Such a young child actually knew about loneliness. Li Yi couldn't refuse no matter what. He could only nod helplessly and said, "Then follow me." The sobbing tone in the Lolita's voice immediately disappeared. An excited expression appeared on her face. "Then let's go find my royal sister now." Li Yi was a little dazed as she led him to the morning dew hall. He only felt that there was no sincerity left in this world. Women who practiced martial arts usually maintained their figures very well. If it was those who were obsessed with martial arts, there was not a single extra thing on their bodies. It was as if they were made by nature. Of course, those who were born with a certain deficiency could not make up for it through practicing martial arts. The flesh on their bodies could be reduced, but it would never be increased. Even though he knew that she had only been drinking the soup for a few days and that it shouldn't have much effect, Li Yi still faintly had an illusion. His gaze subconsciously looked towards a certain part of the eldest princess's body that was dancing with her sword. Women were always particularly sensitive to certain parts of their bodies and could easily feel other people's gazes. The eldest princess who was dancing with her sword suddenly increased in speed. Li Yi reached out and used his middle and index fingers to clamp a long sword. He smiled and said, "Don't mess around." She didn't have any evil intentions. The speed of the sword was not fast and the direction was perfectly straight. Li Yi felt that the scene of him clamping her sword with his hand must be very cool. Teacher is so amazing. The Tsundra Lolita was always so cooperative. Her eyes flashed with little stars and the look of worship made his vanity a little satisfied. Emingzu put away the long sword and looked at him. She asked, "Where is the thing?" "What thing?" Li Yi was stunned for a moment before he remembered something. He said, "That soup needs to be brewed for a long time. I came out in a hurry today and didn't have time to prepare it." Next time, the Tsundra Lolita shook Li Yi's arm and said in a sweet voice, "Teacher, my royal sister doesn't let me drink the soup you brought for her. Can you bring some for Shanning in the future?" Li Yi pinched her little face and said, "No, this kind of soup is not for children to drink." Mingzhu's face turned slightly red. He really knew the effects of that soup. So was he disdaining her? She glared at him vaguely. She walked over and opened something he placed on the table. "Father's handwriting?" She couldn't help but exclaim softly when she saw the 4 big words, Emingzu Academy, written on the paper. Li Yi was having a headache on how to explain to the Tsundra Lolita why that kind of soup could only be drunk by older girls and not younger girls. This was a false proposition because it was more effective for a growing girl than an older girl. But he couldn't really explain it like that. Seeing that she picked up the paper, he took the opportunity to walk over and said, "In the future, regardless of whether it's the capital or the other prefectures, the academies established will be called Emingzu Academy. The meaning is that these academies aim to cultivate brilliant talents like Emingzu for the country." The names of the academies were also very particular. It was very appropriate to use Emingzu as a metaphor for talents. It was easy to understand and meaningful. Of course, the reason why Li Yi gave the academy this name was not because of this. He wanted to let the students studying in these academies know that they could get rid of their poor lives and sit in the bright academy. They could have the opportunity to enter the court and bring honor to their ancestors. They could compete fairly with those powerful peers of the same age. These were all given to them by one person. This person was called Li. She was the eldest princess of the Jing kingdom. Chapter 765. Emingzu Academy? Emingzu murmured the name. She could not believe that his purpose was as he said. No matter how she looked at it, there seemed to be another meaning behind it. The proud Lolita no longer asked Li Yi why she could not drink her royal sister's soup. She tugged at Li Yi's sleeve and said with a blush, "Sir, build a few shining academies too. The Ice Condensation Academy is fine too." After thinking for a while, she felt that she could not forget Yongning. She raised her head again and said, "And Yongning Academy? How about it? It sounds nice too." She felt that although her name was not as nice as her royal sister's, it was much nicer than Qing Yang's. Li Yi touched her head and said, "Okay, I will build another shining academy and let you be the dean. Pinky promise?" The proud Lolita immediately smiled. Her eyes formed a crescent shape and she stretched out her little finger. She had learned this action from Yongning. Yongning knew a lot of new things that she did not know. When she talked to her teacher, she could not understand most of the time, so she simply copied him. Li Yi helplessly hooked his little finger with hers. Their thumbs touched and the proud Lolita said happily, "Pinky promised to hang, it won't change for 100 years. Although she did not know why Pinky promise meant hanging, this action meant that they could not go back on their word. Regardless of whether he hung or not, this was what her teacher had promised her. When she grew older, she would be able to have her own academy. She would be the dean and she would be a little more powerful than Li Han. This would prevent him from showing off in front of her all day long. Emingzu knew that his words had always been powerful. Since he had promised Shining, there would definitely be a Shining Academy in the future. Perhaps by that time, Shining would have already forgotten about this matter. Seeing that they had completed this childish alliance, Emingzu looked at Li Yi and asked calmly, "The Ministry of Rights has made it clear that they will no longer be involved in this matter. We don't even have anyone we can use now. How are we going to get so much money?" She knew that she had encountered great obstacles in raising the money. Whether it was the imperial court or the common people, they were all discussing this matter. Almost no one thought that she could succeed. Everyone was waiting to see her make a fool of herself. Of course, it would be a lie to say that she didn't care about this. It was only because she trusted Li Yi that she asked this crucial question now. Li Yi looked at her and said mysteriously, "Don't worry, the show has just begun." He put away the things he won from the old emperor and explained, "Change your clothes first. We'll leave immediately. We'll talk later." The proud Lolita brandished her sword at the side. The children of the royal family were not required to be proficient in both literature and martial arts. It was even rarer for women to practice martial arts. Among all the princesses, the only one that Li Yi knew was the eldest princess. With the old maid watching from the side, Li Yi didn't have to worry that she would hurt herself. Emingzu changed her clothes and came out. When the proud Lolita came out, Li Yi told her about the plan in detail. Emingzu looked at him and asked, "From the beginning, you knew that the officials from the Ministry of Rights would hit a wall. You also expected that they would withdraw on their own accord. Is this all part of your plan?" Li Yi nodded. "After all, the Ministry of Rights doesn't belong to us. With them around, we can't do whatever we want. If they leak information, it will have some impact. Moreover, how can we let them take the credit for nothing?" Emingzu sorted out the entire process and connected all the things that he had done in the past few days. She couldn't help but think of the mysterious light she saw in his eyes that day. She looked at him and said seriously, "You're so bad." Li Xian stood behind the two of them and looked at Li Yi with wide eyes. He asked in disbelief, "What did you do to Emingzu?" Li Xian looked at the two of them suspiciously for a long time before suppressing the unrealistic thought in his mind. He said, "I've heard about what happened at the academy. I should be able to take out 100,000 taels of silver to use on the academy in the capital. It should be more than enough. As for the rest, we can slowly think of a way. If it was only the capital city, it wouldn't be a problem." But the problem was that the scale of the project this time was so large that it covered the entire Jing kingdom. Just the initial investment alone would be a terrifying figure. No one knew how much money would be needed in the future. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Forget it. Your father-in-law has already donated 200,000 taels of silver. You'd better keep the money." Li Xian's crown prince's mansion wasn't poor. Just the business cooperation between the three families could bring him unimaginable profits. but he was also a spendthrift. The National Treasury could only provide a portion of the research funds for the entire Academy of Science. He had to pay for the rest himself. It wasn't easy to come up with so much money at one time. Li Xian frowned and looked at him. He said, "Don't try to be brave at this time. You don't know how many people are watching this matter and waiting to see Mingzu make a fool of herself." "Make a fool of yourself?" Li looked at him and said lightly, "They won't be able to laugh soon." As they walked out of the morning dew hall, Li Xian looked at him with a profound gaze. He sighed and said, "When I first met you, why didn't I think you were so bad?" The ruler of the capital, Lu Dao, sat in the hall. His head moved back and forth as he dozed off. The weather these 2 days had been hot and dry. Although he held an ice pack to his chest, the room was still stuffy. The rising and falling cicadas outside were even more annoying. Wave after wave of tiredness came at him. Thump. The moment his eyes closed, his body fell forward. His head knocked against the edge of the table. Immediately, a large bump appeared. He was completely awake. He quickly pressed the ice pack to his forehead and took a sip of tea. He was no longer sleepy. He lowered his head and began to read the official documents. These few days, Jianghu could not be considered peaceful. The people were very angry. If they were not properly appeased, there would probably be a big mess in the future. The cause of the matter was that the eldest princess wanted to build many academies so that more children from poor families could have books to study. However, the funds to build the academies were not enough. There were obstacles in raising funds, so the matter was temporarily put on hold. In this regard, the people of Jianghu were very angry. After all, this was a major event that was beneficial to the people. All the poor families wanted to send their children to study and fight for a glimmer of hope to bring glory to their ancestors. However, most families even had problems eating, so it was impossible for them to cultivate a scholar. Now that there was such an opportunity, how could they give it up? Lu Dao could understand their desire. After all, he himself was also born of a poor family. His father had sold everything he had to give him the opportunity to study and take the imperial examination. When he became successful and wanted to be filial, his father, who had worked hard all his life, passed away and did not enjoy even a day of happiness with him. This had always been a regret in his heart. Regarding this matter in his heart, he was also very supportive of the eldest princess. However, there did not seem to be many people in the court who thought the same as him. When he read the official documents and felt sleepy again, a yamen runner came to report that the eldest princess and the Marquis of Chang and County had arrived. County Magistrate Lu's sleepiness was swept away at this moment. He hurriedly stood up, tidied up his official uniform, came to the back hall of the county government, stepped into the room and cupped one hand in the other before his chest to the two people sitting above. Greetings to the eldest princess and Marquis Li. Chapter 766. Lord Lu, what's wrong? Li looked at the bump on County Magistrate Lu's forehead and asked in surprise. Of course, Lu Dao couldn't say that he bumped into it when he was dozing off. He smiled awkwardly and said, "I accidentally bumped into it." If he bumped into it accidentally, there would be no reason to be embarrassed. When Li Yi was in Qingyan Prefecture, he heard that Lord Lu and his concubine had a lot of fun in the bedroom. He might have hurt himself by playing some new tricks last night. He looked at him strangely and said, "Although you're having fun, Lord Lu, you have to be careful." Mingzi looked at them and asked, "What are you talking about?" County Magistrate Lu was also puzzled, but he didn't continue on this topic. He raised his head and asked, "What can I do for your highness and Marquis?" Li was not used to his words. He waved his hand and said, "We're old friends. You don't have to be so polite, County Magistrate Lu." How could he, Lu Dao, be friends with the emperor's close officials and the princess? County Magistrate Lu was nervous, but he couldn't help but feel happy. Although the eldest princess was a woman, she wielded more authority than any of the princes. She was also an influential figure in the royal court. As for County Marquis Li, he was able to influence the political situation. To a certain extent, it could be said that he was able to rise from an insignificant county magistrate of Anxi to a magistrate of the capital. Li didn't say much to him. He took a sip of tea and asked directly, "How many rich merchants do you know in the capital?" Rich merchants? Although he didn't know why Li asked this question, County Magistrate Lu answered honestly, "Although I haven't been in the capital for long, I know many famous country gentlemen and rich merchants near the capital." With many years of experience as a county magistrate, Lu Dao knew clearly that if he wanted to make achievements in his jurisdiction, he had to build a good relationship with the local tyrants first. The capital was different from Anshi County. There were too many local tyrants here and all of them were pythons. He couldn't get close to those high-ranking officials and nobles, but he had gotten to know quite a few of the smaller tycoons and magnates over the past year. That's easy. Li nodded, looked at County Magistrate Liu and said, "There's something I need to ask Lord Liu to do." "I'll be very busy these days," County Magistrate Liu smiled and said, "It's my honor to work for Marquis and Her Highness." He had been with Li Yi for a long time, so he wouldn't refuse these things. After a while, County Magistrate Liu paced back and forth in the county government office alone, his face full of excitement. If the Marquis and the Princess had any good things, they would always think of him first. If this matter was completed, how great a merit would it be? If this went on, he, Li, Princess Yi, Magistrate Dio, Li, and Emingzu, Li Yi, and asked, Li, Magistrate Yi with his hands. And said Magistrate Li, Yi. Li, Magistrate Dio. Li Yi put his hands behind his head and said lazily, "How can I know if I don't try?" Li Yi had no way of explaining this to her. He was also using the experiences of his predecessors to do things. History was always shockingly similar. Many things would not change with the passage of time. Some principles were applicable to the entire universe. Li Emingzi looked at him. "What are we going to do now? Go home for dinner?" Li Yi stretched himself. "Shanning is also here. Do you want to join us?" What happened in the court had always been the focus of the insightful people in the capital. And the establishment of the academy was not limited to these insightful people. Because it was closely related to the common people, more people participated in it. They were always paying attention to the progress of this matter. Among them, there were many powerful people who could get the news from the Ministry of Rights. For example, which officials donated money, how much they donated, who was stingy, and why the officials of the Ministry of Rights were refused at the door, and so on. It was very detailed. Of course, there would occasionally be some messy things mixed in with this information. For example, an official from the Ministry of Revenue only donated 100 taels of silver to the academy. His son spent a lot of money on the top girl of a brothel that night. Another deputy director of the Ministry of Works who donated 50 taels of silver married a concubine the day before yesterday. He held a banquet at home. It was said that the food and wine ordered from Drunken Moon restaurant cost 100 taels of silver per table. Even if he only ordered 20 tables, it would still cost more than 1,000 taels of silver. Not to mention the fact that his concubine was a famous courtesan in the capital. The amount of money used to redeem her was clearly marked. The strings of numbers were written there, causing many people to suck in a breath of cold air when they saw it. Another example was a stingy official who refused the people of the Ministry of Rights outside the door. He spent thousands of taels of silver to buy a precious painting and took turns to invite friends to admire it. Thus, people discovered some things. There was money for prostitution, money for taking concubines, money for buying paintings, money for treating people to meals, but no money for donating money to the academy. In this day and age, there was no such thing as moral blackmail. Some people only felt that these officials were a bit rich and heartless. However, they did not violate the law, so others did not have the right to criticize them. However, this kind of knowledgeable people was, after all, a minority. In this world, most people were ordinary people who had not been educated and only had a shallow sense of right and wrong. Rich people only cared about their own pleasures and did not care about the lives of the common people. Officials who did not make decisions for the people deserved to be scolded. Of course, they did not dare to scold them openly. No one knew how much spittle they secretly spat at those rich and powerful families. In a private room of a tea house in the capital, an elegant middle-aged man looked at the man opposite him and said with a smile, "Sir Wu, that concubine of yours is famous in the capital for her skills in bed. Can your body withstand it?" Sir Wei does not need to worry about this matter. The man who was drinking tea glanced at him and said, "Your son is willing to spend 1,000 taels of gold for a prostitute." This kind of demeanor is probably comparable to that of Sir Wei in the past. The elegant middle-aged man waved his hand and said, "I have already taught that unfilial son a lesson. 1,000 taels of silver is a pity. Add another 2,000 taels and you can buy that mountain-dwelling painting of Yengong. Don't you think so, Sir Qi?" A man next to him glanced at him and said lightly, "You don't have to be cynical. I am willing to spend 3,000 taels of silver to buy a painting than to donate 30 taels of silver to them. There is no law in the Jing kingdom that states that I must donate." The elegant middle-aged man sighed and said, "But the people outside don't think so?" Because of these things, the reputation of the people present was somewhat affected. As officials, they cherished their reputation very much. They gathered today because of the events that happened in the past 2 days. Just a bunch of stupid people. Sir Wu snorted and said, when this matter is over, no one will talk about it anymore. I want to see how long she can hold on without money. Even on such an occasion, he still did not dare to call her name directly. She is still a woman after all. She is going against all the aristocratic families. Even His Majesty. Haha, let's just wait and see. It should be soon. If she can't raise the money, this matter can only be put aside. Let's see how she will explain to His Majesty and the officials. Laughter could be heard from the crowd, and the slightly tense atmosphere finally relaxed. Tell your master. A street away from the tea house, County Magistrate Lu looked at the inquiring servant and said with a smile, tell him that the capital magistrate Lu Daio has come to visit. Chapter 767. Mr. Zhao's mansion was located in the northern district of the capital. Although Mr. Zhao's family was rich, some things could not be done with money alone. No matter how rich he was, he could not live in the area where only the real dignitaries could live. This was determined by his identity. Although businessmen were not untouchables, they were still looked down upon by the upper class. They were not allowed to become officials. Just this one rule was enough to completely restrict them in certain aspects. Therefore, Mr. Zhao, who was playing chess with a friend, immediately dropped the game and hurried out to greet the county magistrate when he heard that the county magistrate came to visit. Seeing a person walking over from afar, Squire Zhao hurriedly went up to greet him and said with fear and trepidation, Lord Lu, your presence brings light to my humble abode. I, Zhao, hope that Lord Lu will forgive me for not going out to greet you. It was not the first time that he met Lord Lu. When Lord Lu had just been promoted to the capital magistrate, he had contacted many gentry and rich businessmen. This was probably what every county magistrate would do after taking office. At that time, Mr. Zhao only clinked his cup with him and did not even have the chance to talk to him. Today, County Magistrate Lu came to visit him in person. His purpose was unknown, but it was impossible for him to play chess with him. Mr. Zhao immediately became nervous. County Magistrate Lu smiled and said, haha, if Mr. Zhao's mansion can be called a humble abode, then I really don't know how to describe my county government. Mr. Zhao saw that he was smiling and did not seem to be looking for trouble. Mr. Zhao relaxed a little and stretched out his hand. Lord Lu, please come in. Come on, serve the tea. Take out my treasured tea. County Magistrate Lu was a tea lover. After taking a sip of the tea, he praised it. Steward Zhao absent-mindedly added a few words. The two of them chatted about tea leaves, daily life and business affairs. Time passed by unconsciously. Those who didn't know might think that they were close friends. Finally, Mr. Zhao could not help but look at County Magistrate Lu cautiously and asked, why did you come to my humble abode? County Magistrate Lu put down the teacup unhurriedly and asked with a smile, do you know that the Imperial Court is going to build an academy? I've heard of it. Zhao Yuanwei nodded. This matter had caused quite a stir in the capital recently. He knew that this matter seemed to have something to do with the eldest princess, but he didn't pay too much attention to the specifics. Then he realized something. He looked at County Magistrate Lu and asked, Lord Lu, what do you mean? To tell you the truth, we've encountered some difficulties in raising funds for the academy. County Magistrate Lu looked at Squire Zhao with a smile and asked, I wonder if Squire Zhao is willing to be generous and do something for the poor students in the world? Zhao Yuanwei was taken aback. Poor students? Poor students? What did it have to do with him? Why did he have to be so generous? It turned out that this Lord Lu had come today to ask him to donate money. The Zhao family was indeed rich, but this money did not grow on trees. Why should he donate it? A trace of dissatisfaction flashed in the depths of Zhao Yuanwei's eyes, but he didn't show it. The smile on his face became brighter and he said, of course I'm willing. I've always wanted to do something for the country. Zhao Fu, go to the accountant and get 100 taels of silver. 100 taels of silver was not much for him. It wouldn't cost him much and he could give this Lord Lu an explanation. He didn't refuse at all. It was not a wise choice to offend County Magistrate Lu for a little money. So he simply set the amount so that County Magistrate Lu wouldn't ask again. County Magistrate Lu still had a smile on his face and said, on behalf of the poor students in the world, I thank Squire Zhao in advance. Zhao Yuanwei nodded repeatedly, it's my pleasure. The housekeeper of the Zhao family quickly took out 100 taels of silver, and naturally a runner helped to accept it. I still have something to do, so I'll leave first. County Magistrate Lu and Zhao Yuanwei exchanged some polite words and then stood up to leave. Zhao Yuanwei stood up and said, "See Lord Lu off." Although he lost 100 taels of silver in vain, it was worth it to see this bodhisattva off. If it weren't for the fact that I really can't take out so much silver, I would like to donate more. When they walked to the gate of the mansion, County Magistrate Lu shook his head and said, "Squire Su from the south of the city donated 3,000 taels of silver to a library for the academy. Shopkeeper Jianghu from the north of the city donated 1,000 taels of silver to a school. I'm afraid both of them have the opportunity to be listed on the academy stele. I'm very envious." Academy stele. Dare I ask, what is an academy stele? Zhao Yuanwei didn't hear him mention this matter just now, so he asked doubtfully. County Magistrate Lu smiled and explained, "To build so many academies in various places, a large amount of silver is needed. The National Treasury can't take out so much money in a short time, so we can only collect donations from various places. When Squire Su donated to the library, a stele will be erected in front of the library. It will clearly state who donated it so that the students will remember who gave them books to study and whose kindness they should be indebted to. In front of the school donated by shopkeeper Jianghu, there will also be a similar stele. As for the academy stele, it will be erected in front of the entire academy. You will see it before you enter the gate. It is personally written by His Majesty. Anyone who has contributed to the academy can be nominated on the academy stele. The purpose is to let the students remember who gave them everything they have. Unfortunately, the academy stele will only be erected once. After this time, unless one has made an extremely significant contribution to the academy, it will be impossible to be nominated." Hearing this, Zhao Yuanwei stopped in his tracks and stood there in a daze. This Sir Lu didn't mention this to him just now. Zhao Ritian had spent half of his life in business. It was fine if people looked down on him, but he didn't want his children and grandchildren to be like this. He didn't want his children to be unable to hold their heads up high forever and never be able to walk with their backs straight. Therefore, he didn't mind spending a lot of money to hire the best teachers for his son, buying the best paper and pens. He even hired 4 study companions. Wasn't it all for the sake of his son's future success, to pass the imperial examinations, and for the Zhao family to get rid of the shadow of being a family of merchants? Why did he do all this? Wasn't it for fame? Donating to the school, donating to the library, and carving his name on the stele in front of the academy. That stele was personally written by His Majesty? From today onwards, who would dare to look down on him, Zhao Ritian? Who would dare to be dissatisfied? If you have the ability, why don't you carve your name on the stele and let His Majesty personally write it? That was an academy after all. Who knew how many people who graduated from there would achieve success and fame in the future, soaring into the sky with a single leap? At that time, perhaps those officials in the imperial court would occasionally remember the familiar name they saw on the academy's monument when they were young and studying. Zhao Ritian. Even if there was only one person who remembered it, it was enough for him and the Zhao family. Not to mention how much those high-ranking officials would remember the kindness of the past. Other than the tombstone, to be able to carve his name on the stele was something that he could brag about for the rest of his life. Just now, County Magistrate Lu said that this opportunity was only available once. If he missed this opportunity, there wouldn't be another one like this. Damn Squire Su. He was indebted to him in the past, but he didn't bring him along for such a good thing. A hint of anger appeared on Zhao Yuanwei's face, but it quickly disappeared. The smile on his face was unprecedentedly bright. He caught up with County Magistrate Lu in a few steps. Seeing that County Magistrate Lu was about to step out of the mansion, he hurriedly said, "Sir, please wait." County Magistrate Lu looked back at him and smiled. "Oh, Squire Zhao, is there anything else?" Chapter 768. About the donation of silver. I suddenly feel that we should do our part in such a good thing for the country and the people. Only by building more academies can more poor students have access to education and cultivate more talents for the country. Yes, that's it. The more Officer Zhao spoke, the more confident he became. In the end, the expression on his face became extremely sincere and proud. "So, I want to donate more silver to the academy. Lord Lu, let's talk about it in detail?" County Magistrate Lu nodded and said with a smile, "I'm very pleased that Officer Zhao has such a kind intention." "Sir, please, Officer Zhao, please." 3,000 taels of silver was not a small amount even for the Zhao family. However, he had worked hard for silver all his life. At this moment, silver itself was not so important to him. When one reached such a position, he would understand that some things couldn't be bought with silver. Some things couldn't be solved with silver. Therefore, after thinking for a long time, he gave another number. It was 30 times more than the 100 taels he had promised. County Magistrate Lu said with a smile, "Officer Zhao, if you are generous, the poor students of the academy will remember you. It's all for the country." Officer Zhao was waiting for this sentence. He couldn't confirm whether what County Magistrate Lu said was true or not, but he thought that County Magistrate Lu wouldn't lie to him. After all, County Magistrate Lu was a high-ranking official and couldn't lie to him. "There's one more thing I need to ask of Officer Zhao," County Magistrate Lu said while looking at him. "Sir, please speak your mind. I'm not familiar with the rich merchants around the capital city. I hope Officer Zhao can visit them. After all, one person's strength is limited. If there are more people as generous as Officer Zhao, of course. Don't worry, I'll take care of it." Officer Zhao answered repeatedly with a burst of ecstasy in his heart. The importance of this matter was self-evident. County Magistrate Lu actually entrusted this important task to him. If he could handle this matter well and properly, he would have a say in the county magistrate's office in the future, let alone in the long run. This was something that couldn't be bought with 3,000 taels of silver. No matter how he looked at it, he wouldn't lose money. Of course, at the same time he thought of another matter. The Zhao family did have some money, but they were not arrogant enough to think that the Zhao family was the wealthiest merchant in the capital. Once everyone gathered and learned the truth, wouldn't they all rush to donate money? At that time, it would be hard to say if his name would still be left on the academy stele. After all, he believed that those people wouldn't reject the opportunity to leave their names behind. Of course, he had just confirmed with County Magistrate Lu that after the funds of an academy were collected, the rest would be used to build other academies. This academy couldn't be named, but there would always be others. But for the sake of safety, he had to be careful. He waved his hand at the housekeeper and said, "Go to the accounts room and withdraw 2,000 taels of silver." When he returned to the chess room again, his friend could not wait any longer. "County Magistrate Lu, what brings you here?" A stout middle-aged man looked at him and asked with great surprise, "When did you know County Magistrate Lu?" Zhao Yuanwei smiled mysteriously and said, "Let's not rush this matter. I have something great to tell you, as expected of Lord Li." County Magistrate Lu walked out of the Zhao mansion, sighed and murmured, "Brilliant, really brilliant. The 5,000, to be precise, it should be 5,100 taels of silver. It was as easy as blowing off dust. He didn't even need to say anything, and the other party would take the initiative to come to him, as if afraid that he wouldn't accept it. It was even easier than robbing. He knew how cold the officials from the Ministry of Rights were treated when they went to visit each and every one of them. It was really a world of difference. Moreover, after walking out of the Zhao mansion, he thought of a more important thing. It was true that merchants loved their names, but some people seemed to love their names even more. In just a few days, the entire capital city would once again be bustling with noise and excitement. A yamen runner stood behind him and asked, "Lord, where are we going now?" "To the Su mansion." "Which Su mansion?" "Su mansion in the south of the city." An hour later, a fat man with a protruding belly and a face full of fat sent County Magistrate Lu out of the mansion and said with a smile, "Take care, Lord." When he turned his head, his face instantly became gloomy. "Damn, such an important thing, surname Zhao actually didn't tell me." Behind County Magistrate Lu, the yamen runner still understood and said with a smile, "Lord, I know. Let's go to shopkeeper Zhang's mansion now." "Hee hee, father, you lost again." The proud Lolita jumped up from her seat and shouted happily. If she won 10 games against her father, she could go out of the palace to play once. If she won 20 games against her father, she could also bring Yongning. Therefore she now played chess with her father every day. She had saved up for many days. She had already decided in her heart that when she had saved 10 days for both of them, she could go out of the palace with Yongning and did not need to come back for 10 days. Emperor Jing touched her head lovingly and said, "Shaning, go play first. Father is a little tired. We will play again in the afternoon." The proud Lolita nodded obediently. Although she also wanted to save enough time to go out of the palace earlier, her father's health was not good. She had grown up and had to be sensible. She could not let her father be tired. Looking at her jumping away, a trace of guilt appeared on Emperor Jing's face. As a father, he still felt a little sorry for using such a method to keep his daughter by his side to play chess with him. The most difficult thing was handed over to Emingzu and Li Yi. There were no important state affairs these days. It was not easy to have a few days of leisure, but his heart was still worried about some things. He put away the chess pieces and asked, "What has Mingzi been doing these days?" "Her Highness has been in the palace." Chengda's voice came over. "Apart from practicing every day there is no... Oh, by the way, Her Highness is still learning to cook." "Cooking?" There was some doubt in Emperor Jing's voice. Mingzi liked to play with knives and swords since she was a child, but it was definitely not a kitchen knife. When did she become interested in these things? "Yes, cooking." Chengda nodded and said, "She often asks the catering bureau to send things over to make soup and so on." Emperor Jing was puzzled for a moment and no longer thought about these things. He asked, "What about Li Yi?" "At home he goes out occasionally, but it is to accompany his wife for a walk." Emperor Jing frowned and murmured, "What are they doing?" He did not set a deadline for this matter, but the voices in the court about this matter were not small. The pressure that fell on them was certainly not light. How could they be so leisurely? After thinking about it, he asked, "Has there been anything strange about the two of them recently?" Chengda said, "A few days ago Her Highness went out of the palace with him to see the capital's governor, Lu Dayo. After that, the two of them did not have any contact with anyone." Emperor Jing was not unfamiliar with the name Lu Dayo. This person had some abilities. His most prominent characteristic was that he could stand in the perspective of ordinary people. He had a keen insight that many ministers in the court did not have. He could often find some problems that ordinary people could not notice. He was a rare talent. Emperor Jing put away all the chess pieces and said, "Find out what Lu Dayo has been doing these days." Chapter 769. The Secret Intelligence Department was the most feared institution among the officials. The 6 ministries and the Prime Minister had no right to order them around. They were directly responsible to the Emperor. Everyone knew about the Secret Intelligence Department, but it was still mysterious in the eyes of the officials. No one knew if any of the maids, servants, or even the concubines he had just married last night were spies from the Secret Intelligence Office. Of course, no one knew the specifics. In any case, that was what was being said outside. Everyone talked about the Secret Intelligence Bureau as if it was a miracle, but whether it was the common people or the officials, no one was able to see its true colors. But one thing was certain. It was easy for the Secret Intelligence Department to investigate anything. They could clearly find out whether the bump on Magistrate Lu Dayo's head was hit on the corner of the table when he was dozing off, or when he was having sex with his concubine last night. Not long after Chengda left, he came out again with a secret letter. The Secret Intelligence Department sent countless secret letters to the palace every day. They were classified and sorted out, so it was not difficult to find Magistrate Lu Dayo's. Jing Emperor opened the secret letter and read it carefully. If someone in the capital wanted to investigate the whereabouts of the capital magistrate, Lu Dayo, it was not a difficult task. However, if they wanted to investigate in depth what he had done, who he had met, and what he had said, it would be very difficult. Of course, no one would do these things if they had no grievances with him. It would not be a good result if they were found to follow and investigate an official of the imperial court with evil intentions. But this was not a problem for Jing Emperor. Just by reading the beginning, Jing Emperor had already guessed what Lu Dayo had been doing these days. He was doing the same thing as the officials of the Ministry of Rights did before. The difference was that the officials of the Ministry of Rights raised money for officials and nobles who were related to the Chui family. But Lu Dayo raised money for those businessmen. Of course, it did not mean that businessmen were more generous than officials and nobles to be able to raise so much money in a short period of time. It was because they could leave their names on the academy stele and could leave their names in front of a building of the academy if they donated money. The people from the Ministry of Rights didn't say that when they visited those officials and nobles. The merchants had the same name. They wanted to be famous, so they spent a lot of money to build an academy. Which of the officials and nobles did not have the same name? They were more famous than the merchants. Why didn't they donate? Or did they only donate a little? Because they didn't know. That was because they did not know that by donating silver, they could leave their names in the academy and have their names engraved on the tombstone for generations to come. As smart as Jing Di was, he almost instantly figured out the crux of the matter. Some people had been tricked. From the very beginning, Li Yi, or rather Mingzi, had been scheming against them. The other officials and nobles could start to donate after the whole thing was revealed. However, the officials from the Ministry of Rights had visited mostly officials or families related to the great clans. Could they donate again? If he didn't donate, the reputation he had built up over the years would suffer a huge blow. If he were to donate again, the effect would be minimal since he had already done it once. And those great clans relied on nothing more than the reputation they had built up over the years, the prestige they had among the gentry and the common people. Without these, they were worse than a tiger without teeth. If the establishment of an academy so that the children of poor families could study was a nibbling away at those great clans, and it would take decades to see an effect, then the donation this time was the most direct and indirect blow to them. Of course, the scope of the attack was not all great clans. The Chui clan and the noble families of the Chui clan, after experiencing a huge loss of money, were about to face a more serious mental blow. This was something he had wanted to do for many years, but he had never done it. Jingdi's expression was not clear whether he was gratified or disappointed. Finally, he just put down the secret letter in his hand and sighed, "I am really old." His somewhat straight back bent down and he lay comfortably on the bed. For the first time in 20 years, he felt that the burden on his shoulders seemed to be a little lighter. That was because someone had carried something for him. Hearing the even breathing sound coming from the bed, Changde looked out of the hall. A smile flashed across his face, and he slowly retreated into the shadow of the hall. "Sir, I want to eat hot pot." The proud Lolita pulled Li Yi's sleeve and kept shaking it. Li Yi patted her head and said, "It's such a hot day, why do you want to eat hot pot? Listen to Sir, drink more soup." Since he came back, he rarely cooked those spicy things. Every day, his meals were mainly light, mainly to take care of Rui's health. Making all kinds of light dishes was his recent main direction. After a while, there were two girls shaking his arm, one on each side. Li Yi looked at the proud Lolita, and then looked at Yong Ning, who was pulled over by her and avoided his eyes because of her guilty conscience. He said helplessly, Okay. I'll let you prepare it. Later, you go to another small house to eat. There were plenty of vegetables in summer. In fact, now, no matter what season it was, they could eat fresh vegetables. In order not to let her pester him, he simply let them eat hot pot alone. Emingzu walked over and looked at him. "There's morning court tomorrow. I don't think I can hide it for long." "It's about time." "I don't plan to hide it for long." Li Yi added some seasonings to the soup and closed the lid. Then he asked, "The money should be enough to build the academies near the capital, right?" Li Mingzhu nodded. The capital could be said to be filled with wealthy merchants. The amount of silver they donated added up to a terrifying figure. According to the plan, it would be more than enough to build a dozen large academies. It would even be enough to keep these academies operating for a long time. Even when General Shui, the family of generals and other acquaintances came to her. Although they didn't know the inside story, they were willing to donate some money. But she rejected them with the same reason. It was not time to unveil the veil on this matter yet. Of course, although there was already a lot of money, it was still a long way from covering the entire Jing kingdom. But the money would only be used in the capital. Every place would adopt the form of local donations. Presumably, those people would be more willing to let their names spread locally. As long as the precedent was set in the capital, it would be much easier for the other states and prefectures. If they followed this method, it would not be unimaginable for Emingzu academies to spread throughout the Jing kingdom one day. After tomorrow we should receive more money. The amount will be very large. How to spend it is a problem. This is just the beginning. In the future, the scope will be wider and there will be more money. Li Yi adjusted the fire to a gentle one and said, "Also, to do these things, it's impossible to rely on just you or me. If you want to find someone trustworthy, you can find someone from the Women's Union or other places. Ability is important, but you have to ensure absolute loyalty. These shouldn't be a problem for you." Emingzu pondered over his words and nodded slightly. "There's one more important thing." Seeing him speak again, Emingzu turned to look at him with a serious gaze. Li Yi opened the lid of the clay pot and scooped some soup. He passed the bowl to her and said, "Help me taste this soup. Is it ready?" Chapter 770. The high-ranking officials in the capital had been living comfortably these past few days. They had not attended court for a few months and no longer had to wake up in the dark. Sometimes they did not even have time to eat breakfast before rushing to the palace gates to gather. They had to stand in the hall for 4 hours and their backs were sore. They also had to drag their tired bodies to various departments to handle various chores. Now they could sleep until dawn, drink their morning tea and slowly make their way to the yamen. If they were the leaders of various departments, as long as they were not seen by the imperial censors, they could relax even more. Of course, if they received news that morning court was to be held, even the laziest of people would have to restrain themselves and obediently stand at the palace gates for an hour to enjoy the morning breeze. Although it was still summer, the sun had not risen yet. Wearing thin clothes, it was still a little cold. Old General Shui stomped his feet and wrapped his clothes tightly around himself. He sighed, "These old bones are getting worse and worse. I wonder how many more days I can attend court." Old General Ma walked over and said, "We old bones do not have much time left. Luckily those children are not bad. Old Shui, you can rest in peace even after you die." Before the morning court began, when the officials were waiting at the palace gates, they had to line up according to their official rank and department. They were not allowed to walk around casually, nor were they allowed to congregate casually. There would be a special imperial censor to record the officials' behavior and record it as part of their evaluation. A few imperial censors glanced at the elders of the family of generals who were gathered together, then quickly shifted their gazes away. When they caught a glimpse of an official in the crowd who was secretly touching his buttocks, they immediately walked over with dark expressions and said coldly, "Sir, please pay attention to your manners." The official had wanted to quietly adjust his pants but did not expect to be seen by the imperial censor. He could only look at his nose and his heart. After the imperial censor left, he glanced at the few people who were squatting and chatting under a tree not far away. An indescribable bitterness rose in his heart. This time, old General Shui did not engage in a verbal battle with old General Ma. He sighed and said, "What is Her Highness thinking?" The Her Highness he was referring to was naturally the eldest princess. The incident at the academy had caused a commotion. Countless people in court were waiting to see her make a fool of herself, but she seemed to have completely forgotten about it. She had not done anything in the past few days. The family of generals had wanted to help, but she had rejected them. A red-faced old general thought for a moment and said, "Her Highness has always had her own ideas. I believe we will know in court today." Due to their special status, the family of generals maintained a distant relationship with all the princes. However, the eldest princess was different. She was a woman, and even if she was close to the family of generals, it would not attract criticism. Moreover, the family of generals and the princess residence were closely connected in terms of interests. They were bound together for good or ill. Even if they put aside their feelings, they would naturally pay attention to her matters. In recent days, the emperor, who was ill, had almost handed over all the political affairs to the Minister of State to handle. However, every once in a while, he would still hold a morning court session to ensure that he would not be too distant from the political affairs. The flood of the two provinces was still an extremely important matter. How to control the flood, how to properly settle the refugees, and how to rebuild after the disaster were all important matters for the imperial court. There would be news coming from the front lines almost every day. However, the disaster this time was obviously different from the previous years. The original method could not be used, and the situation was not optimistic. After a round of recommendation by the court officials, the emperor reselected officials who were good at controlling the flood. This matter was temporarily put aside. The focus of the debate in the court shifted to another matter. The establishment of the eldest princess's academy could be said to be closely affecting the hearts of many courtiers. Regardless of their intentions, there was no doubt that countless people were concerned about the progress of this matter. Emperor Jing looked down and said faintly, "Lu Dayo, tell me, how is the establishment of the academy going?" This caused many people in the court to be slightly stunned. The name Lu Dayo was unfamiliar to them. Although there were many officials in the imperial court and it was impossible for them to know all of them, it was not to the extent that they had never heard of their names. This could only be blamed on the position of the magistrate of the capital city. It was not big, but it was not small either. In the local area, it was already the head of a county. In the capital city, it was wandering on the edge of the court. It was not even qualified to be noticed by some people. Of course, what surprised them was not this unfamiliar official, but the establishment of the academy. It was clearly the eldest princess who had undertaken the task. Where did this Lu Dayo come from? Seeing a person coming out from the back, many people were already thinking about something. However, some people still faintly revealed expressions of ridicule and disdain on their faces. From their point of view, this kind of matter was simply impossible. This was because the establishment of the academy would not only involve the capital, but also the entire Jing kingdom. Even the national treasury would not be able to take out so much silver. Lu Dayo stepped forward and said respectfully, "Your Majesty, so far, a total of more than 500,000 taels of silver has been raised. 13 academies in the capital city are already under construction. 500,000 taels of silver. This number still made many people's hearts skip a beat. This was not a small number. Everyone knew that when the Ministry of Rights raised money, they hit a wall at every turn. Not to mention 500,000 taels of silver, they could not even raise 5,000 taels of silver. In just a few days, where did this 500,000 taels of silver come from? They heard clearly that Lu Dao said raise money, which meant that this money was not allocated by the national treasury. Where did they raise it from? Their doubts did not last long. Lu Dao had already continued. Most of these 500,000 taels of silver were donated by the merchants in the capital city. I have already followed your Majesty's instructions and ordered people to build a stone tablet. Once the academy is built, the stone tablet with the names of the donors will be erected in front of the academy, so that the students and the people will remember their contributions to the academy. As Lu Dao spoke slowly, the expressions of many officials in the imperial court changed from confusion and astonishment to shock and fear. How could such a thing happen? Those people were only lowly merchants. What right did they have to carve their names on the tablet for the students and the people to revere and pass down from generation to generation? And after today, what would the people of the world think of them? Even merchants knew to contribute to the country. How could they, the aristocratic families that had been passed down from generation to generation, not know? One had to know that, unlike the ordinary officials in the imperial court, the reputation of their families had been accumulated bit by bit. They loved the people and were kind and charitable. They had accumulated bit by bit over decades. With that stone tablet erected in front of the academy, the reputation and fame that they had painstakingly accumulated was all gone. Bah, what aristocratic families! They were not even as good as merchants. How would they have the face to call themselves aristocratic families in the future? In particular, the true aristocratic families were able to stand for hundreds of years without falling. They relied on the terrifying reputation that they had accumulated over a long period of time. If even their reputation was gone, and they had even abandoned the trust of the people and the aristocratic families, no matter how large a family was, it would still be at the end of its road. This simple stone tablet had left these aristocratic families with no other choice. Donate, they had to donate. Lost money could be earned again, but lost reputation was irreversible. Of course, some people's choices were very simple while others were more difficult. For example, the officials of the Ministry of Rights had visited. If they didn't donate, they would definitely be reviled by the people. If the merchants donated, the other aristocratic families would also donate, which would expose them. In the future, would they still have a foothold in the capital city in the Jing Kingdom? Donate, how much should they donate? They had previously donated dozens or hundreds of taels of silver, and even had a very unpleasant relationship with the officials of the Ministry of Rights. If they went up to donate again with a straight face, how would they have any face left? Even if they donated, they wouldn't have much face left. It was obviously a remedial measure which would make people despise them even more. So here came the problem. Should they donate or not? At this moment, they had never hated the officials of the Ministry of Rights so much. Chapter 771. At this moment, many people from the Ministry of Rights were in the court. Feeling the resentful gazes around them, they groaned inwardly and felt extremely wronged. They were the ones who did it, but they were also following orders. The fundraising was ordered by the eldest princess, and the withdrawal was ordered by imperial concubine Shui. If they could persist until the end, it would be fine. Even if they would offend so many people, offending a few people was nothing compared to the huge credit they would get for helping the establishment of the academy. However, the problem was that they gave up halfway. He had offended so many officials and clans for no good reason, and all the credit had been snatched away by that Lu Dao. He had really suffered a great loss on this errand. If they had known that the eldest princess and His Majesty had such a plan, they would not have pulled themselves out of this matter. Perhaps this method was only thought of by the princess after they left? It was also possible that the princess already had this plan and wanted them to withdraw voluntarily. How could it be? They had no grudges against the princess. Her Highness did not have to deal with them like this. At this moment, there was nothing but depression in their hearts. The morning court session ended very early. As soon as Lu Dao walked out of the hall, he was surrounded by numerous people. Lord Lu, please wait, please wait. Your Excellency Lu, I am also willing to contribute to the Academy's fundraising. Lord Lu, I wonder if you have time today. How about we talk about the Academy's fundraising in detail? Lu Dao finally enjoyed the feeling of being surrounded by stars. Even after being promoted to the capital commander, he did not expect that there would be so many high-ranking officials of the imperial court surrounding him with smiles. He could not help but feel a little smug. However, he knew that this was not the time to be complacent. He calmed down and said in a low voice, "Don't worry everyone. This is not the place to talk. If you want to donate, please send someone to the government office to register as soon as possible." Old General Shui stood at the door of the hall and looked at Lu Daiyou, who was surrounded by people. He stroked his beard and said, "Your Highness's method is brilliant, really brilliant. Why didn't I think that there would be such a marvelous technique?" Old General Ma sighed and said, "It was originally a matter of asking for help, but it has been completely reversed. Countless people are fighting to donate money. This method is not only suitable for the capital, it is applicable everywhere. Even the local academies can be built using this method. The world is full of people who cherish their names. Wonderful, wonderful." The eldest princess had a special identity. Naturally, it was impossible for her to be surrounded by people like Lu Daiyou. However, there were many people who looked at her with more emotions than before. Even though she had done many things that men couldn't do before, they couldn't help but look down on her because of her gender. However, after this incident, no matter who it was, they had to seriously retract their underestimation of her. Some people even rejoiced in their hearts. Fortunately, she was a woman. Fortunately, she was only a princess. If she were a prince, it would be enough to make all the brothers who had a chance of inheriting the throne, including the king of Shu, lose all hope. No matter how many things she had done, how great her reputation was, and how much power she held in her hands, at the end of the day she was just a woman. Li Yi learned of this news in the afternoon when Wang Yong came to visit him at home. Wang Yong's visit this time was not to discuss business, nor was it to specifically tell him about these things. He was just implicitly asking if he could leave a good spot for the Wang family on the academy steal. Of course he could. The academy was the child of him and the eldest princess. As a father, he could still make the decision on this matter. It was not only because the Wang family was Li Xian's father-in-law, but also because the Li family and the Wang family had a friendly working relationship. Without knowing it, the Wang family was willing to donate 100,000 taels of silver to support him and the eldest princess's unborn child. This was a favor that could not be easily repaid. Li Yi looked at him and asked, "The Wang family donated 200,000 taels of silver to the academy. It is enough to leave a name in all the academies in the capital. However, Brother Wang, do you think it is enough?" Wang Yong was stunned and asked, "Brother Li, what do you mean?" For example, part of the 200,000 taels of silver could be used as a reward for outstanding students. On the one hand, it could help the poor students improve their lives, and on the other hand, it could stimulate them to study hard. It is killing two birds with one stone. Li Yi thought for a while and asked, "How about this sum of silver be called the Wang Family Scholarship or the Wang Yong Scholarship?" The old emperor did not attack the aristocratic families indiscriminately. In fact, he was gradually weakening the disobedient aristocratic families. As for the Wang family, who were sensible and had a close relationship with the royal family, the old emperor adopted a policy of cozying them up and appeasing them. Therefore, Li Yi did not mind giving the Wang family another benefit. The Wang Family Scholarship? Wang Yong's eyes suddenly lit up. It was good to have one's name engraved on the stone tablet. It was not certain that one's name would go down in history, but it would exist for a longer period of time. This scholarship, which he had never heard of before, was obviously another great thing for the Wang family. The students supported by the scholarship were definitely people of outstanding talent. Since they accepted the Wang family's support, they would definitely owe the Wang family a favor and could be considered half a student of the Wang family. And such people of outstanding talent would also have a very high chance of becoming outstanding in the future. Not everyone was expected to repay the Wang family, but after all, they would have an unbreakable connection with the Wang family. In just an instant, Wang Yong weighed the pros and cons in his mind. The conclusion he came to was that there were only pros and no cons. He raised his head to look at Li Yi and said sincerely, "Those 200,000 taels were donated by the Wang family to build the academy. How can I take money from them? How about this? I'll go back and ask for instructions. Every year, a sum of money will be used to set up the Wang Family Scholarship, which will be used to support students with excellent character and scholarship." Li Yi did not mind this at all. The money would eventually be used on those students. The Wang family were not fools. They definitely understood what Wang Yong understood. He was only pointing it out. When the time came, they could discuss it with the eldest princess themselves. "I'll take my leave first." Wang Yong was in a hurry to report to the family. Li Yi did not stay any longer. From now on, he did not need to interfere in this matter anymore. Education was a century-long project. It would take a long time to show its effects. But now that the foundation was stable, there would be fewer obstacles in the future. He had written down everything about the academy in great detail on a piece of paper. Her Highness just had to follow the prescribed order. Of course, she still had to control some of the details herself. Li did not want to arrange everything for her. She was able to handle the women's union, various businesses, and the affairs of the women's college so perfectly. It was enough to show her ability. There would be more things she had to decide and deal with in the future. She could not become dependent. Li needed to extinguish the seeds that had just arisen as soon as possible. Li stared blankly in a certain direction. When he made this happen, he actually did not feel much of a sense of achievement. Instead, he was a little hesitant. This was after all his wishful thinking. He could not tell anyone, including her. But no one knew better than him how difficult and long this path would be. Whether it could be replicated was still unknown. If things did not develop in the direction he had planned, it would be more harmful than beneficial for her to have such power and resources in her hands. Most importantly, before the old emperor passed away, he did not think he could help her reach that step. That day would come sooner or later. Who would be the new emperor? What would her future be like? Yongning, Shaning, if that day really came, he would definitely take Yongning away. The proud Lolita was also worried. The palace was not a place she should stay. She would be unhappy for the rest of her life. As for the eldest princess, she would not leave. What should he do? Rob her? But he could not defeat her. What a headache. What are you thinking about? A familiar voice came from the front. Li looked up and saw Mingzu walking in. He pointed to the opposite side and said, "Sit." Li Mingzhu sat down opposite him and thought of the way he looked at her just now. In that instant, his gaze seemed to contain something very strong, something that she could not describe with words. Her heart was slightly flustered. "What were you thinking about?" she asked subconsciously. "Nothing." Li poured a cup of tea and handed it over. He said, "Let's talk." "What do you want to talk about?" She looked up at Li Yi. "Just talk." Li looked at her and said, "Like life, ideals and so on?" Chapter 772. When talking about life and ideals with a beauty, the choice of time and place was very important. Under the warm yellow light, on the soft bed, chatting through the night, or in the quiet courtyard, next to a clean stone table, drinking a pot of fragrant tea, chatting leisurely. These were two completely different moods. Of course, the former was not about the moods. Hearing his words, the princess shook her head after a moment of hesitation, thinking that he was just joking. She changed the topic and said, "The aristocratic families that refused to donate money before have changed their attitude and donated more than those merchants." Li Yi waved his hand and interrupted her. "I said we won't talk about this. Today we only talk about life and ideals." Mingzi looked at him and her expression was no longer serious. She picked up the teacup and took a sip, quietly waiting for him to continue. Li looked at her and asked, "Seriously, what's your plan for the future?" Mingzi thought for a while and said, "I'll settle the academy first. I've been busy for a long time." The future that Li Yi mentioned was naturally more long-term than hers. He asked again, "What about 5 years later? 10 years later? 5 years later? 10 years later?" Mingzu was stunned. Under Li Yi's gaze, she shook her head and said, "It's too far away. I've never thought about it." She had no ambition. It was fine if she had big breasts but had no ambition. She had such a small breasts but had no ambition either. After the old emperor ascended, what would happen to the eldest princess who had lost her protection? It would be a happy ending for her to be betrothed to the son of a meritorious minister. With the power in her hands, it seemed unlikely that such a good ending would happen. She would most likely be suspected and coveted by others. Even if the king of Shu was not the emperor, he would be some other king. Speaking of which, if she continued to be a princess who was only responsible for her beautiful appearance, it was very likely that she would spend the rest of her life peacefully like most princesses in the history books. However, it was impossible for her to go back now that she had come this far. She thought about it carefully. How did she end up on this path? Her life was originally smooth. Cough, cough. Li took a sip of tea and choked on his own tea. After coughing twice, he waved his hand and said, forget it. If you haven't thought about it, then don't think about it. The most important thing in life is to be happy." It didn't matter how she came to this path. Since she couldn't turn back, she might as well walk this path to the end. It would be great if she could wait for the light of dawn, but if she couldn't, she would just rob it. As for the rest of the mess, who wanted to mess with it, as soon as his thoughts were clear, he felt as though his entire being had relaxed. When Emmingza looked at Li Yi, she realized that he was also looking at her. His gaze was very strange. There was hope, worry and love in his eyes. Behind those indescribable gazes, there was a kind of emotion that she could clearly feel. The will to fight. Although she didn't know why he would have such thoughts at this moment, she felt that it was funny. She looked at Li Yi with a faint smile and asked, "You want to fight with me?" Li Yi was actually thinking that he might not be a match for the eldest princess at that time. Should he ask for a helper or something? He was startled when he heard that and then laughed. "Are you kidding me? Why would I want to fight with you? The soup is still boiling in the kitchen. I'll go and see if it's ready. By the way, are you thirsty? Do you want me to serve you a bowl of soup?" Although he hadn't fought with her before, he was definitely not a match for someone who could fight with Mississippi Lu. Just the thought of fighting with her made him feel a dull pain in his butt again. The two little girls were better. Girls should be gentle and virtuous. Why should they learn martial arts? Although the words gentle and virtuous had nothing to do with the arrogant Lolita, they were both learning martial arts. Look at Rui. She was already a master, but she didn't use martial arts to bully others. Look at her and Mississippi Lu, who always talked about fighting with each other. How could they act like girls? Sir, come and play chess with me." The arrogant Lolita waved her hand in the room. Li Yi walked over and replaced Duan Wu. As long as the word chess was involved, the arrogant Lolita couldn't be treated as a child. Even an adult would fall into her hands if they weren't careful. It was said that the old emperor had lost dozens of games to her. She was now obsessed with Gamoku. Ever since Li Yi taught her this way of playing, the entire women's college, including the teachers and students, were unwilling to play with her in a few days. It was not easy to find someone who was willing to play chess with her. Li Yi and the arrogant Lolita played chess. Yong Ning stood beside him with her hands behind her back and her head peeking at the chessboard. Thinking of something, Li Yi looked at her and asked with a smile, "Cindy, if I'm going to a place far away and won't come back for a long time, would you be willing to go with me?" The little girl was stunned for a moment. The expression on her little face immediately became nervous. She pulled Li Yi's arm and asked hurriedly, "Where are you going?" "A place far away from here. There might be no rocking cars, no merry-go-round, no delicious food, no fun. Wherever Big Brother goes, XNE will go." Before Li Yi could finish, the little girl hugged his arm and said with a serious face. She clenched her fists tightly, as though she was worried that Li Yi would disappear if she let go. With her small heart, she could not imagine what the world would be like without her brother. No one would tell her the story of the beautiful sheep, and no one would understand what she said. They would think that Cindy was crazy, a bad child who lied. She was not willing to go back to the past. Li Yi touched her head lovingly and hugged her in his arms. He said, "Don't worry, wherever I go, I will bring Cindy." The little girl nodded obediently and stretched out her little hand. Pinky swear. From her point of view, the matter of pinky swear was a promise that could not be changed. The arrogant Lolita looked at the opposite side vigilantly. Sir always said things that she did not understand to Yong Ning. Just now he said that he was going to leave and pinky swear, but he did not say anything to her. Could it be that they wanted to elope behind my back? She looked at Li Yi and did not even call him sir anymore. She asked suspiciously, "Where are you going?" Li Yi looked at her and asked, "We are going to a very far place. Does Shaoning want to go?" Although Mr. Wang said that there was nothing delicious or fun in the place they were going to, she didn't believe it at all. As long as Mr. Wang was there was nothing delicious or fun. Even if there was nothing, Mr. Wang could make it appear just like before. However, if it was really far, her father would not agree. She hesitated and asked, "How far?" "Very, very far. It will take more than a month to walk out of the capital." Ah. The arrogant Lolita looked defeated. The farthest place she had been to was Sir's house. She could not imagine how far it would take more than a month to walk out of the capital. Her father would definitely not agree. She sighed and looked at Li Yi with some hidden bitterness in her eyes. "But father will not agree to me going to such a far place." Of course, Li Yi could not tell her that this was all after her father left. At that time she would no longer be the carefree little princess she was now. She would have to face the ugliness of the adult world. Li Yi nodded and said, "Forget it. The place we are going to is very dangerous. We will have to fight mountain bandits and catch bandits with the heroes of Jianghu. You are a girl, it is better for you to stay in the palace." "Fight mountain bandits and catch bandits?" The arrogant Lolita suddenly widened her eyes and asked, like my royal sister, a heroine who catches bandits. She had admired 3 people since she was young. One was her father, one was her teacher, and the last one was her very very powerful royal sister. When she heard that her royal sister left the palace to become a heroine and catch bandits, she was extremely envious and pestered her to tell her stories of chivalry. She had long thought that when she grew up to her royal sister, she would also leave the palace to become a heroine and travel the Jianghu, punishing evil and eliminating traitors. Li Yi nodded. They were both going to catch bandits, but what they were going to do in the future was much more exciting than catching bandits. Father will definitely not agree. The arrogant Lolita's eyes darted around as she muttered. At a certain moment she suddenly grabbed Li Yi's arm and said with a face full of expectation, "How about we elope without father knowing?" Li Yi looked at her in shock. At a certain moment he suddenly felt very sinful. He felt like a bad uncle who kidnapped a little girl. Chapter 773. The proud Lolita was already 13 years old. In the future, 13-year-old girls already knew a lot of things. In this world, if a girl was born in a poor family, she would be able to support herself and even get married at the age of 13. However, the proud Lolita grew up in the palace. Among all the princes and princesses, she was the kind of person who was surrounded by the stars. She had never suffered much, so her mental age was obviously younger. Li Yi looked at her and explained helplessly, "Well, eloping requires 2 people who like each other first. Sir, don't you like shining?" The proud Lolita looked at him pitifully. Her big watery eyes blinked and she looked like she was about to cry. Li Yi covered his eyes and couldn't bear to look anymore. He nodded and said, "All right, I'll bring you along." Seeing that the proud Lolita was about to pounce on him, Li Yi hurriedly reached out his hand. "Stop, play chess properly." The proud Lolita rolled her eyes at Li Yi and sat back. If he didn't let her kiss him, then so be it. After a while they would elope together. Sir once wrote a poem, what was it again? If 2 people love each other for a long time, why would they stay together day and night? Since they were going to elope, one less kiss was no big deal. When he was in a good mood, his thoughts were naturally smooth. Even the speed at which he placed the chess pieces was much faster. Therefore, Li Yi soon realized that he was probably about to lose. Losing to his own disciple was a very embarrassing thing. Li Yi decided to concentrate and see if he could salvage the situation. "Look, what's that?" His face suddenly showed a look of surprise and pointed behind the proud Lolita. The proud Lolita turned her head and looked for a while before turning back with some dissatisfaction and muttering, "What? There's clearly nothing." She picked up a chess piece and was about to put it on the position that she had chosen just now. As long as this chess piece was placed, Sir would lose. However, her hand had only landed halfway when she looked at the chessboard in a daze with a puzzled expression. "Shining's Gamoku is getting better and better, but don't be proud. Continue to work hard." Li Yi smiled and patted her little head. He stood up and walked out of the house. "Sir, you cheated." After a moment of silence, a crisp sound rang out. A petite figure pounced over from behind. After a while, Li Yi shook his head and turned his collar up a little to hide the shallow bite marks on his neck. He did not know where she learned this from. She grabbed the neck and bit it. Although it was not heavy, if others saw it, it would be inappropriate for a princess to do so. How could an unmarried princess be so intimate with a man? He might even be mistaken for having a bad intention of abducting the princess. After the matter of the academy was completely settled, there were people to take care of everything. After sending away the arrogant Lolita, he had a lot of free time. He thought that after dinner, he would accompany Rui to the school of divination. The scenery by the lake was good, and fishing in the pavilion in the middle of the lake would be a small pleasure. He of Chang'an County Dean of Chang'an College, but had of free time. But in the past few days, the gate of the county government was almost broken by people. Of course, they didn't come to complain, but to give money. After the morning assembly that day, all the officials and aristocratic families in the capital city sent their servants to the county government to register. The amount of silver they donated increased from thousands to tens of thousands. In 2 days the amount had reached millions of silver. Of course, not only did they donate silver, but they also donated materials, mostly books. Whether the academy could use them or not, he accepted them all. This matter was well done, and he didn't disappoint the eldest princess and Lord Li. County Magistrate Liu waved to a runner happily and pointed to the red paper on the table. He said, "Come on, put this one up too." The outer wall of the county government had been covered with red paper. The black ink on the red paper was particularly conspicuous. It was a detailed record of the donations of the big families every day. After it was arranged according to the amount, it was posted outside the county government, attracting the attention of countless people. In this way, the families who had been watching could not sit still, and the families who donated less could not sit still. Those who didn't donate could hide for a while, but sooner or later, they would be found out and regarded as the example of the heartless rich. Those who donated less would be ranked behind most of the families. They would lose face and might as well not donate at all. They could only increase the amount to improve their ranking. But in their hearts, they cursed the person who came up with such a bad idea. Fortunately, the reputation of the family could be preserved. The loss of some silver was just a loss, but the foundation of the family couldn't be lost. But some people weren't so lucky. Although the Chui clan and several clans that were on good terms with the Chui clan had also donated silver at the beginning, when the officials of the Ministry of Rights visited them, they had offended them a lot, and even donated the humiliating price of 50 taels of silver. Later they were exposed to be extravagant and wasteful in other aspects, which greatly damaged their reputation. Even if they had taken remedial measures afterward and donated a lot of silver, it was difficult for them to recover the lost part of their reputation. The eldest princess once again showed her ability in front of the public. Although she didn't do it casually, it made the whole capital city and the whole Jing kingdom in the future excited. The word, a woman, probably wouldn't appear in people's minds for a long time. It was said that when Her Highness was a constable in Qing and Prefecture, she was nominally under the capital magistrate, Lu Daiyou. At that time he was just a small county magistrate. Thinking of this person's rise all the way to becoming the capital magistrate, and today's great achievements, some officials in the court also faintly expressed goodwill to Lu Daiyou when they donated silver. It was difficult for them to make friends with Her Highness, but Lu Daiyou was a breakthrough. Anyone could see that the eldest princess was different from other princesses. Maybe in the future they would have to rely on her more. It's hooked. It's hooked. Seeing the buoy move, the Tsundere Lolita shouted at the side. Li Yi shook his hand and caught a palm-sized fish from the lake. Li Yi felt that it was completely luck. Under such interference, the fish hadn't been scared away. The guy in charge of feeding the fish in the academy must have been often lazy. They were now on the pavilion in the middle of the lake in the Mathematics Academy. This lake, the center of the lake, and even the buildings by the lake were all personally built by the students of the Mathematics Academy. The fish in the lake had just been thrown in, so fishing was forbidden. Anyone who violated this rule would be punished by frog jumping 10 times around the field. Li Yi believed that the students of the Mathematics Academy would rather jump into the lake than frog jumping. Unfortunately, in the entire academy he was the only one who could punish himself. Li Yi handed the fishing rod to the arrogant lowly who was already itching to try. He held Ru Yi's hand and walked outside. Hello, headmaster. Although this headmaster had only been to the Mathematics Academy a few times, on the first day of admission, all the students had seen how powerful he was. Along the way, everyone they met bowed respectfully. Hello, teacher. Hello, mistress. Li Han was supervising a few students who hadn't finished their homework when he inadvertently glanced over and immediately straightened his body. This was almost a subconscious conditioned reflex. There was no Prince Jean in the academy, and there was no distinction between poor students and children of officials. There were only teachers, students, and classmates. Li Han wasn't as fat as before. He had lost a lot of weight in the past few months, and his face had even become a little angular. Li Yi was surprised to find that if this little fatty slimmed down, he would actually be quite handsome. The genes of the royal family were not bad. At least among the princes and princesses he had seen, none of them looked ugly. Taking a closer look, this kid looked a bit like Li Xian. He wondered what he would look like when he grew up. Li Xian adopted a laissez-faire policy towards the Academy of Sciences. No one knew where he found those mad scientists, but he didn't need to supervise them at all. He only went to check the progress every once in a while. Most of the time he was in the Mathematics Academy. At this time he and the young man named Xin Shu, whom Li Yi had met once or twice, were sitting in the pavilion in front of them. They seemed to be studying some profound problem. Li Yi looked at the booklet in his hand. It was the one he had given him before. There were some basic physical and chemical knowledge in it. It was hard to imagine that besides Li Xian, there was actually someone who was interested in these things. No wonder Li Xian could stick with him all day long. From the day that Princess Shizhi was found to be pregnant, she was taken to the palace by the empress. Li Xian had to get the Empress's permission to see her. Except for Princess Shitzi, he didn't have any other concubines. For such a long time he didn't find a woman but found a man. This was really worrying. Chapter 774. He didn't know what the two of them were studying, but they seemed to be very engrossed. When Li Yi and Rui walked past them, Li Xian didn't even notice. Li Yi couldn't help but sigh. Li Xian's bad habit of being more interested in men than women hadn't been changed even after they got married. Rui turned to look at him and asked in confusion, "Why are you sighing, husband?" Li Yi shook his head and sighed at the degeneration of morality in the world. Even Li Xian couldn't avoid it. He said, "How can two men stick to each other all day long? Aren't you afraid of being laughed at?" "What's there to laugh at?" Rui was startled. Even if there were no women in the school, it was very normal for classmates to discuss problems. It would be improper if they were really accompanied by women all day long. She looked back and said, "Moreover, how do you know that they are two men?" "What do you mean?" Li Yi was shocked when he heard this. Could it be that during the time when he was not in the capital, Li Xian actually... Impossible, there was no such magical technology in this era. He looked at Rui and said in surprise, "My wife, do you mean that Xin Shu is a woman?" Thinking about the last time he saw Xin Shu, he found that he was a little effeminate. As for whether he had an Adam's apple or not, he really didn't notice it. After all, he didn't look at him carefully. Besides, scholars in this era tended to be a little submissive. Some people didn't have an obvious Adam's apple, so he didn't have the preconceived idea that she was a man. So Li Yi felt that what Rui said was very likely. Rui nodded and said, "When she came to our house last time, I found that this young Master Shen should be a woman dressed as a man." Li Yi had previously ridiculed the TV series for not being able to see women dressed as men. Now it seemed that it was not the case in the TV series at all. Unless they were really familiar with each other to a certain extent, it was really not easy for a woman to be recognized after dressing up seriously. Although the status of women in the Jing Kingdom had improved a little, the barrier between men and women was still the same. Even if the academy only accepted men, he would have to think of other ways to get in. Jinsu. A figure immediately appeared in Li Yi's mind. This idiot can't even figure out whether it's a man or a woman, and still boast that young Master Shen is very smart in front of me all day. Li Yi doesn't intend to expose her. It's better to let Li Xian discover this kind of thing by himself. The two of them found a secluded spot by the lake and sat down. The students were in class and the academy quieted down. A gentle breeze blew across the surface of the lake, causing the ripples to ripple. Holding hands with her, the whole world seemed to become quiet. Quiet and tranquil. "My husband, do you like boys or girls?" Rui suddenly asked. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "Girls." Rui asked, "Why?" "Girls are like wives, so they must be very obedient. But you have to be careful, and you can't let Rui lead them astray." "My husband, please don't let Rui hear what you said." Li Yi turned his head and looked around. Mississippi Lu didn't follow him out today, so she shouldn't suddenly appear. Then he turned back, curled his lips and said, "So what if she hears it? Do you think I will be afraid of her?" His eyes inadvertently looked around again and he finally completely relaxed. Rui looked at the lake and murmured, "In a few days Rui will be 18 years old." Mississippi Lu wasn't 18 years old yet, which meant that he couldn't even defeat a child. Realizing that the Princess Royal didn't seem to be 18 years old, Li Yi suddenly felt a little sour in his heart. Rui continued, "She won't tell me some things in her heart. In a few years she will be married and I don't know if she has a crush on someone." Although Rui was Mississippi Lu's sister in name, their mother passed away early and the elder sister was like a mother. She was only 2 years older than Mississippi Lu, but she played the role of an elder sister and a mother since they were young. "We don't have to worry about these things for her. She is so good at martial arts and she is proud and arrogant. She won't like men who are not as good as her. But above that, the only people who are better than her are those grandmasters who are older." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "At worst, I will raise her for the rest of her life, as long as she changes her bad habit of squandering. Actually, I can't bear to be separated from her." Rui smiled and said, "When Mom and Dad were still alive, Rui was still very young and hadn't started practicing martial arts. She followed me all day and made a promise with me in the future." "Promise what?" Li Yi's ears pricked up. He rarely heard about Mississippi Lu's childhood from Rui. If he could find out something embarrassing about her, he would have a bargaining chip next time and wouldn't be so passive all the time. Nothing. Thinking of that ridiculous thing, Rui smiled and shook her head. Li was a little disappointed. When did Rui learn to keep him in suspense? No, he had to ask Xiao Huan when he got back. But Xiao Huan was about the same age as Mississippi Lu, and she was always muddle-headed. She might not be very clear, so he had to find a chance to ask Mississippi Lu indirectly. The servant girl drank a mouthful of soup and shook her head. She said, "I've never heard Miss and Second Miss talk about it. Xiao Huan doesn't know what kind of promise Miss and Second Miss have." She blinked her eyes and looked at Li Yi. Puzzled, she asked, "Why don't son-in-law ask Miss?" If Rui was willing to tell him, he wouldn't have to come and ask Xiao Huan. Li Yi patted her little head and said, "Good girl, drink more soup. It's good for your body." The servant girl nodded and rubbed her slightly bloated belly. The soup that son-in-law made was very delicious, but if she drank too much, her chest would always swell. It felt a little strange. It wasn't really uncomfortable, but that place always made people feel embarrassed to talk about it, let alone talk about it to son-in-law. Was this what son-in-law meant by growing up? When Li Yi walked out of the door, Mississippi Lu was wiping her eyes. Li Yi felt that she treated the sword better than him. If he and the sword fell into the water at the same time, Mississippi Lu would definitely choose to fish for the sword instead of him. What kind of unspeakable promise did she and Rui have? This question had been on his mind since yesterday. If he didn't ask, he would feel uncomfortable. So Li Yi decided to ask in a roundabout way. Li Yi walked to her side and asked curiously, "What kind of promise did you and Rui have when you were young?" "What promise?" Mississippi Lu glanced at him and continued to bury her head in wiping her eyes. She only asked blandly. Looking at her appearance, she seemed to have completely forgotten about this matter. It seemed like it wasn't important. Li Yi shook his head. His curiosity was greatly reduced. Instead, he was puzzled as to why Rui would be secretive about something that wasn't important. "It's nothing. You can continue. I'm going to cook." He didn't want Mississippi Lu to know that he was prying into her privacy. He turned around and walked in the direction of the kitchen. "Promise? That's strange." Mississippi Lu looked up at him and murmured. When she lowered her head again, she seemed to have thought of something. Her hands suddenly stopped moving and her body stiffened. "Promise?" At this moment, a memory that was long ago but engraved in the depths of her mind quietly emerged. Before Li Yi could step into the kitchen, a white shadow flashed in front of him. Mississippi Lu instantly appeared in front of him. She looked at him with a face full of embarrassment and annoyance. "What do you know?" "What do you mean?" Li Yi looked at her in surprise and asked in confusion. Mississippi Lu stared at his face closely. When she found that there was nothing but confusion on his face, she finally felt relieved. It seemed that he just did it unintentionally. At this moment he had forgotten about what just happened. "Nothing." She waved her hand and turned to leave. "Wait." Li Yi stopped her in time. When she turned around, he asked curiously, "What on earth did you two promise?" Chapter 775. It was fine if she didn't want to tell him, but she hid him just because he asked about the agreement. Li Yi rubbed his butt and was even more curious about their agreement. Rui would never hide anything from him. But if she didn't tell him after he asked her once, he would get the same result even if he asked her 10 times or 100 times. It was almost impossible to break through from her. As for the Lu family's second young lady, he would think about how to strike at her in a subtle way after his but had recovered in 2 days. In the morning, someone from the palace came to inform him that he had to go to court tomorrow. He had just been free for a few days and he didn't know what the old emperor was going to do, which made him feel like he was in trouble. Li sat down and poured a cup of tea, wondering if he should take a sick leave. His butt hurt a little, so he had to rest for at least half a month. But the old emperor didn't let him go to court usually. If he specially sent someone to inform him, it meant that something really happened. If he asked for a sick leave now, it might be Chang who came to pick him up tomorrow. He better go and have a look. After all, he was worried about Princess Royal. He wanted to see how she was progressing in the study. It wasn't easy to have a good start, so he couldn't let anything go wrong. "Husband, why did you provoke Rui?" Li lay on the bed. Rui shook her head and slowly pressed a certain part of his butt. "I just want to ask what the agreement was." She didn't answer. "Why did you hit her?" "No man can stand her temper. I'm afraid we'll have to raise her for the rest of her life." Li groaned comfortably. In fact, Mississippi Lu didn't hit him hard today, so his butt didn't hurt anymore. It was more comfortable to be massaged by Rui. "Husband, did you ask Rui?" Rui was stunned, and then she smiled and said, "Husband, you don't know anything but you asked her rashly. Of course she will be angry." Li didn't ask again this time. Rui naturally had her reasons for not saying it. He didn't want her to feel the slightest bit embarrassed. "When Rui was young she always liked to stay by my side. At that time, mother asked her what she would do when big sister got married." Recalling what happened when they were young, Rui smiled. "At that time Rui hugged me and said that when she grew up, she wanted to marry the same person as big sister so that they could be together forever. At that time she was still young, so how could she understand these things? Children's words carry no harm. After she grew up, no one was allowed to mention it." Li was a little dazed as he listened. He couldn't help but imagine a silly and adorable little girl hugging her sister and swearing that she would marry the same person and be with him forever. Who would have thought that the silly and adorable little girl would grow up to be like this? Li thought that she had developed this character since she was young. He didn't expect that when Mississippi Lu was young, she was no different from an ordinary little girl. It was just a naive vow of a little girl. Whether it was him or Rui, they naturally wouldn't take it seriously. They just occasionally thought about it, and perhaps it had a different feeling. Li lay on the bed thinking about what it should be like at that time. He didn't know when he fell asleep. When he opened his eyes, the sky was already bright. Rui walked in from outside and put the hot water aside. She said, "The people from the palace are already waiting outside. Husband, get up and wash up quickly." Li had always felt that it was a very inhumane rule to stand at the palace gate 1 to 4 hours before the cold wind blew. After the cold wind blew enough, he still had to stand in the main hall and wait for the emperor to come out. It would take a long time. He just needed to reach the main hall before the old emperor. As for what the censor would say, would he care about these people who gossiped? When he went out and saw Mississippi Lu, Li subconsciously made a gesture of covering his butt. This made him feel very embarrassed, especially when he saw the trace of mockery in her eyes. The desire to take revenge became stronger. Unfortunately, he could only imagine it. If he wanted to pay the price, he would definitely be the one who suffered a crushing defeat. Li looked at her and said with a smile, "Does the promise you and Rui made when you were young still count?" If he couldn't fight back physically, he would defeat her spiritually. For Mississippi Lu, who cared a lot about her reputation, the latter was far more effective than the former. Sure enough, after hearing this, her expression froze. Her face turned cold and she slowly raised her hand that was holding autumn water. Li had a smile on his face. He was not worried at all. The people from the palace were standing not far away. In front of outsiders, Mississippi Lu would never do anything to him. Sure enough, she raised her hand halfway and then slowly put it down. Li smiled. This was his first victory in the recent confrontation with Mississippi Lu. A complete victory. Just as Li was thinking about this, the frost on Mississippi Lu's face suddenly melted like snow. She actually smiled. It was a smile that Li had never seen before. To be precise, it was a smile that he had never seen on her face. Li couldn't help but shiver. This was a very strange feeling. Second young lady Lu, whose face was as cold as frost, gave him the feeling of a warm sun in March, like a spring breeze. But when she revealed a smile that was exactly the same as Rui, it was like a basin of ice water was poured over his head, making him feel cold from head to toe. Mississippi Lu put autumn water down, maintaining a faint smile on her face. At this time, Li really felt that she and Rui were really sisters. He had seen this kind of smile on Rui's face countless times. She reached out to help Li adjust his collar. Her eyebrows were full of smiles and she said softly, "Come back early. I'll wait for you at home." Li felt that the ice water that was poured on him was beginning to freeze. I'm leaving?" He didn't dare to look at Mississippi Lu again. He quickly turned his head and almost ran away. Because he had made a major mistake in estimating the enemy's strength, he was once again defeated in a new round of confrontation with Mississippi Lu. Mississippi Lu stared blankly in a certain direction. When she picked up autumn water again, she found that her palms were full of sweat. Li got into the carriage, his heart was still beating wildly. Strange, too strange. Mississippi Lu actually smiled at him like that, helped him adjust his collar, looked at him with a smile like Rui and said like a little wife, "Come back early, I'll wait for you at home." What was wrong with this world? The guards at the palace gate still had a deadpan expression. The passage leading to the palace was still narrow, and the officials stood in the main hall as usual, waiting for the emperor to appear. Li ignored the censor's gaze and walked to the pillar he was most familiar with. When he leaned against it, he realized that the world was still this world. As for whether Mississippi Lu was still Mississippi Lu, it was not certain. For the first time he thought that today's morning court would end slowly. He was worried that when he returned home Mississippi Lou would be standing at the door with the same smile on her face. She said to him with a smile, "You're back?" If that was really the case he would go to the Cold Mountain Temple today. Whether the old monk Tanin was in seclusion or not, he would kidnap him. And the old Taoist Yuan from last time, he didn't know where his Taoist temple was. He shouldn't be in a hurry to become an immortal. The most important thing now was to help Mississippi Lou exorcise the evil spirits. Chapter 776. Hey kid, did the sun rise from the west today? Or is my eyes playing tricks on me? Why are you here? Although the voice from the front was not loud, there were not many people in the imperial court who dared to speak like this in the main hall and completely disregard the censor. Li sighed and said helplessly, "I can't help it. His Majesty summoned me." Old General Shui looked at him and asked in surprise, "Why did His Majesty summon you?" Li was curious himself. If the old emperor wanted to summon him for something, he would usually summon him in private. Every time he summoned him to court, nothing good would come out of it. Old General Shui did not ask further. He walked to his side and said in a low voice, "You have to leave a good spot for the Shui family on the Academy's stele." Li looked at him in surprise and said, "Shouldn't you talk to Her Highness about this?" Old General Shui glanced at him and said, "Don't think I don't know. Although Her Highness is the one behind the Academy, it must be your idea behind the scenes." The Chui family did not offend the princess. Her Highness would not do such a sinister thing. "I don't know what old Shui is talking about." Li Yi leaned against a pillar and said, "I really can't control the Academy. Old Shui, you should talk to Her Highness. Based on the relationship between the princess and the family of generals, not to mention a good spot for the Shui family on the Academy's stele, you can even erect a stele outside the Academy for old Shui." "Why erect a stele for me? I'm not dead yet." Old General Shui glanced at him but was not angry. He said, "It's not convenient for me to show up for Her Highness. If others see it, they will inevitably think that Her Highness is abusing her position for personal gain. You're different. The Li family has donated a lot of money. It's impossible for others to gossip. You can just help me blow pillow talk." In truth, Li already had a plan in mind. Although the family of generals wasn't exactly impoverished, their lives had only gotten better recently. It was impossible for them to donate a lot of silver and compete with the aristocratic families. In reality, he had always wanted to separate one of the academies and build it into the military academy of this era, specializing in cultivating military talents. At that time, after old General Shui, old General Ma, and the other veterans retired, they would also be able to play their remaining role and teach some students. This would be of great benefit to the continuation of the family of generals. This was also what they were willing to do. When Li Yi visited them last time, he heard the generals sigh. If they didn't even have to attend court in the future, they would probably be very bored. These old generals were very good to him. In the past, they had shielded him from many storms in the imperial court. Naturally, he would have some selfishness in the matters of the academy and would do something for the family of generals. Of course, apart from this, there was another reason that could not be stated clearly. However, he had to discuss this matter with them in advance. Otherwise, they would think that he was abusing the elderly and squeezing out the remaining value of the old generals. He couldn't take the blame for that. Really? Old General Shui didn't seem to care at all about squeezing out the remaining value of him. Instead, he was in high spirits. Li nodded and said, "Of course, but this has to be agreed upon by the old generals. After all, no one in the Jing Kingdom knows better than you all when it comes to arranging troops, breaking through enemy lines and charging. When the time comes, it will still be you who will manage the entire academy. Of course, the nominal dean will be Her Royal Highness. When all the academies in the country were built, the eldest princess would be the dean of all the academies. Not just in name, she would be equivalent to the Minister of Education of the Jing Kingdom. This position would not be given to anyone else by the royal family. Don't worry. Those old fellows would love to have something to do when the time comes." Of course, old General Shui understood what he meant. The imperial court wouldn't completely hand over such an academy to them. It was better to have the eldest princess as the dean than someone else. Those old fellows wouldn't object. He originally wanted to ask for more details, but the hall suddenly became quiet. Seeing a figure walking out from the back of the hall, old General Shui immediately returned to his original position. Li Yi poked his head out from behind the pillar. When he saw that Emperor Jing was already sitting on the dragon chair, he quickly shrank back. The most important topic discussed in the imperial court today was still the flood control. The imperial court had sent several groups of officials to deal with the flood in the south, but they couldn't effectively deal with it. The focus of this morning's discussion was this matter. The officials were all eager to offer advice, but very few of them were able to put forward constructive suggestions. They either repeated the routine of the predecessors or said some nonsense that seemed reasonable but were actually all fake. Li Yi was a little annoyed listening to them from behind the pillar. Emperor Jing looked at the noisy imperial court below. His eyes swept around a few times, but he didn't see a certain figure. He frowned and said, "Where is Li Yi?" The pillar in the hall was very thick, just enough to cover his entire body. When Li Yi heard it for the second time, he realized that someone was calling him. He walked out from behind the pillar, bowed and said, "I'm here." Emperor Jing saw him hiding behind the pillar again and glared at him vaguely. He said, "The imperial court has sent 2 groups of officials to deal with the flood in the south, but they failed. In your opinion, how should we deal with the flood this time?" As soon as Emperor Jing said this, many people in the imperial court looked slightly gloomy. Regarding the flood control, all the civil and military officials in the imperial court expressed their opinions, but no one could enter Emperor Jing's eyes. Only County Marquis Li was pointed out by Emperor Jing even though he hid behind the pillar. It showed how much Emperor Jing trusted him. This was really not a good thing for some people in the imperial court. "Your Majesty, what I want to say has already been said by the officials." Li Yi said helplessly, "I really don't know how to deal with the flood. The power of nature was so terrible that even in the later generations, it was not something that could be resisted by human beings. No matter how many books he read and how much knowledge he had, he did not think that he could be better than the professional flood control officials of the Imperial Water Surveillance. Moreover, limited by technology, the flood control methods of the later generations could not be realized in the present. His knowledge was not of much use as a reference. Moreover, he had to analyze the actual situation and conduct field investigations. It was better not to get involved in this muddy water. In a few months Rui would give birth. He did not want to leave at this time. Before this he had left for a long time. "Okay, you can leave." Emperor Jing waved his hand and realized that he had subconsciously regarded him as the last straw of hope. Dealing with the flood was not a matter of memorizing books or reciting poems. Even the officials of the Imperial Water Surveillance could not do it. What good method could he have? Some people in the hall sneered. It was true that County Marquis Li was good at using some strange tricks, but when it came to governing a country or things that required real ability, he would show his true colors. This time, Li Yi did not return to his original position. He had been called out by the old emperor once. It was not good to hide behind the pillar again. "You should not have said that just now." Old General Shui slowly moved to his side and said in a low voice, "Even if you really don't understand, you can repeat it according to what the person in front of you said. Don't use such tricks in the future." "I understand." Li didn't mind. If he didn't link it to the actual situation and just talked about it, the people in the imperial court wouldn't be a match for him even if they joined forces. However, this kind of thing couldn't be discussed on paper. One word from him could cause countless people to suffer. It was better not to speak. The matter of controlling the flood did not come to a conclusion in the end and could only be temporarily put aside. The imperial court once again sent more officials over. Li Yi estimated that today's morning court should be over soon. Should he go to the old monk Tanin or old Taoist Yuan first? This was a question worth thinking about. At this moment, Emperor Jing above said something and a eunuch walked out from behind him. It seemed that he was going to announce an imperial edict. Li Yi decided to go back to find out the situation first and then make a plan. He inadvertently looked up and found that Emperor Jing was looking at him. His heart thumped and he instantly had a very bad premonition. Chapter 777. The old emperor's gaze seemed to have a deeper meaning, and the ominous feeling in Li Yi's heart intensified. At that moment he was in a trance, so he didn't hear clearly what the eunuch had said at the start. He seemed to have called out his name, or perhaps he had heard wrongly. In any case, the eunuch had said a lot, and Li Yi could only hear that he was praising someone. Something about a young hero, countless contributions to the country, and 1,000 years of good fortune, and a series of more flowery words, praising that person as rare in the world and hard to find in the heavens. Li Yi finally relaxed. Although he was outstanding, he wasn't that outstanding. It seemed like the eunuch wasn't talking about him. As long as the person didn't find trouble with him, he could do whatever he wanted. To be conferred the title of Grand Minister of the Golden Purple Imperial Treasury, a great honor. Li Yi understood the last sentence. Grand Minister of the Golden Purple Imperial Treasury, and he wondered which big shot had retired. No wonder the old emperor was so generous with his praise. Grand Minister of the Golden Purple Imperial Treasury was a third-rank official. Although it was just a rank and title without any real power, it was an extremely high honor for an official in the imperial court. This kind of official arrangement was inherited from the previous dynasty. After an official retired, the imperial court wouldn't ignore them. Usually they would arrange a suitable place for them and at the same time, squeeze out their remaining value and give them a rank but no real power, such as an advisor to the nation. This was also a tradition in the Jing kingdom. Usually it was given to retired officials. They could also participate in the imperial court, and their status was usually higher. However, this was only limited to the more respected officials. Ordinary officials didn't have this qualification. Before these officials retired, they were the prime minister and other pillars of the country. Even after they retired, the emperor would still attach great importance to their opinions. Therefore, although they didn't have any real power, they had a deep influence on the imperial court. Li Yi remembered hearing the words young hero just now, but he must have heard wrongly. He turned to look at old General Shui and asked, which official in the imperial court retired? After he finished speaking, he saw that old General Shui was looking straight at him with an expression of extreme shock. Not only old General Shui, but the surrounding officials also looked at him as though they were looking at a monster, their faces full of disbelief. What's wrong? Li Yi opened his mouth and asked. That extremely bad premonition appeared again. What are you waiting for? Thank you. Old General Shui whispered and pushed Li Yi out. What are you thanking me for? Li Yi staggered and stood in the middle of the hall, his face full of confusion. Your Majesty, you can't do that. Before he could react, an old figure walked out of the crowd and said loudly, County Marquis Li is a young hero and has made countless contributions to the country, but he has just been crowned as the Minister of Honor. There has never been such a precedent in our dynasty. Your Majesty, please reconsider. This person was an official of the censorate. Li Yi stood there in a daze. He couldn't believe his ears. The person the eunuch had just read was himself. What kind of joke was this? An official was still an official and he had to work. The old emperor definitely wouldn't just give him a title for fun. He was still waiting to take care of his child, so why would he be an official? Actually, after the eunuch finished reading, the entire court was already boiling. Even the supervising censorate, who was supposed to maintain discipline, was stunned. A county marquis at the age of 21 was already the only precedent in the dynasty. Needless to say, he was a county marquis, and he had risen from a commoner without a noble title in just 2 years. As early as when he was made a marquis, there was quite a commotion in the court. There were countless officials who submitted petitions to the emperor to retract the order. Not to mention the officials who already had enmity with him, even the officials who didn't have a deep relationship with him and didn't have any interest in him felt that it was inappropriate. However, when he was kidnapped, the emperor was furious and severely punished 2 officials who didn't want to let go of the matter. After that, no one dared to provoke the emperor again. A county marquis was a county marquis. At that time, no one knew if he could come back. As time passed, the matter completely calmed down. After he came back, there were a few people who brought up the matter again, but they were all lightly brushed aside by the emperor. Thus, the matter of him being made a marquis was completely settled. It hadn't been that long, but the emperor actually made him a marquis. What kind of favor was this? Since the founding of the country, those who were given this position were all important officials who had worked hard for the country for their whole lives and were respected by all officials. What virtue did a young boy have? This was no longer a favor, it was a special favor. Thus, some officials in the court became excited. As if they were injected with chicken blood, they listed dozens of reasons why Marquis Li couldn't be made a marquis. Their spittle flew in all directions and they were full of righteousness. Of course, the most talked about reason was that he was too young. Although he had made great contributions to the country, was familiar with the classics, and had high attainments in mathematics, he didn't know how to govern a country and wasn't qualified for this position. After all, although the Marquis was only a disbanded official, he had directly participated in the affairs of the country and had an extremely important position in the court. It couldn't be held by a young man, These were all pleasant to hear. To be more serious, they directly pointed out that the emperor shouldn't be so fond of him. Since ancient times, those who were favored by the emperor were all sycophants. Li Yi retreated behind the pillar again to avoid being stained by their spittle. He showed an extremely depressed expression on his face. Naturally, he was depressed because the old emperor was looking for trouble. He didn't even bother to be the dean. How could he be a doctor? He planned to stay at home and be a full-time nanny to take care of the child after Rui gave birth. Naturally, the less trouble, the better. How could you hide such a big thing? Old General Shui came over and saw the expression on his face. Then he looked at a certain official who was still talking incessantly. He curled his lips and said, "Don't worry about those people. They can't do anything about the emperor's decision." Of course, Li Yi wasn't worried about this, but he couldn't explain it to him. At this time, many people around him had already congratulated him with cupped hands. If he didn't have a few friends in the court, he would be a failure. In fact, except for the Chui family and those firm supporters of the king of Shu, no one went up to advise him. "Alright, I have made up my mind. If you have any other opinions, we will discuss them later." Emperor Jing stood up from the dragon throne and waved his hand. Court dismissed. Li Yi didn't even have the chance to refuse. He saw Emperor Jing stand up and leave. At this time, most people in the court had their eyes on him. Li Yi bid farewell to old General Shui and the rest before striding out of the hall. He didn't want to stay here and be looked at like a monkey. "Lord Li, please wait." Not long after he walked out of the hall, a voice came from behind. Li Yi turned his head and saw the master of the Wang family walking towards him quickly. At this moment he naturally couldn't leave directly. The master of the Wang family walked forward and cupped his hands. He smiled and said, "Congratulations, Lord Li. Let's walk and talk." Seeing that many people had walked out of the hall, Li Yi pointed to the front and said. The master of the Wang family stopped him not only to congratulate him, but also to talk about the Wang family's scholarship. In the future, the Wang family would take out a sum of money every year to reward the outstanding students of the academy, covering all the future academies in the Jing kingdom. In addition, he also expressed his willingness to set up the same scholarship for the School of Mathematics. Naturally, Li Yi wouldn't refuse. The Wang family wanted to establish a reputation among the scholars, which was what the old emperor wanted to see. Li Yi always felt that he took special care of the Wang family, not only because they were stupid, rich and obedient, but he didn't want to know the reason. He didn't need to think about it. After separating from the master of the Wang family, when he was about to walk out of the palace, he realized that he had been interrupted by that matter and forgot to find the eldest princess to understand the progress of the academy. He turned back and naturally received the congratulations of a group of officials. When he met the Minister of Revenue and the Minister of War, he had to stop and say a few words. He had already wasted a lot of time coming to the morning dew hall. The little palace maid at the door saw him and was stunned. She stopped in front of him and said, "Marquis the princess?" She had never stopped him before. Li Yi asked in surprise, "The princess is not here?" The little palace maid nodded and said, "Her Highness has gone to the Imperial Garden." "Then I will go to the Imperial Garden to find her." Li Yi nodded and walked in a certain direction. He was also familiar with the Imperial Garden. In the summer, the Imperial Garden was dense with trees and was a good place to escape the heat. Although he could enter the Imperial Palace at will, he couldn't enter a place like the Imperial Garden at will. The guard at the door went in to report and soon came out to lead him in. The eldest princess was sitting in a pavilion in the garden, looking down at something. Li Yi sat opposite her and said, "I came this morning to attend court, so I didn't bring soup." Emingzi didn't seem to hear what he said. She looked up at him and asked, "I heard that father has conferred you the title of Minister of Honor?" She was well informed. Li Yi was a little depressed. He nodded and said, "I don't know what His Majesty is thinking. Isn't this nonsense?" Emingzi glanced at him and looked at the lush green beside her. She said softly, "Father has his reasons for conferring you the title of Minister of Honor. Don't talk nonsense." Chapter 778. Time passed by half an hour. After the court was dismissed, Emperor Jing did not directly return to his bedroom. Instead, he habitually called the two prime ministers and several high-ranking officials in the court, and went all the way to the Imperial Garden. In the past, he would discuss with these people in the Imperial Garden about things that had not been decided in the court and finally made a decision. Apart from a few matters, he had never acted arbitrarily in the affairs of the state. When he walked out of the hall, he stopped and said to a eunuch behind him, "Go to the morning dew hall and invite Princess Royal here." Although Emingzu was only a woman, he did not know when he started to treat her as a girl who only loved martial arts. Some of her views on state affairs and political affairs often made his eyes light up, and even directly changed his thoughts and decisions. In the past 2 years it was especially so. Prime Minister Qin, Prime Minister Shen, and several high-ranking officials naturally had no objection to this. They were not qualified to object. What Princess Royal had done in the past 2 years, even if all of them added up, was still shameful. Just like in the folk opera, women were not inferior to men. It was not an exaggeration to use this word to describe Princess Royal. In the imperial garden, Emperor Jing sat on a stone chair in the pavilion. Prime Minister Shen and Prime Minister Qin were old, so Emperor Jing specially allowed them to sit together. As for the other high-ranking officials, they could only stand. I confer the title of Marquis of Chang, and Li Yi as Minister of Jinzi Guanglu. What do you all think? Just now in the hall, these people did not speak. In their position, unless the emperor's decision was extremely inappropriate, they would not take the initiative to speak up. Prime Minister Qin pondered for a moment and said, "Marquis Li Yi is a young hero and has made countless contributions to our Jing kingdom. However, your Majesty has already given him a great favor by promoting him to a county marquis. I think that Marquis Li Yi is still too young and does not understand state affairs and politics. He is not qualified to be a minister of Jinzi Guanglu. If your Majesty insists on this, I am afraid that many officials in the court will be disappointed." Even he did not dare to deny Li Yi's achievements. Just the matter of heavenly punishment alone was enough to make him more meritorious than all the officials in the imperial court. Not to mention that he had turned the tide, defeated the envoy of the Qi kingdom, and founded the computing academy. Prime Minister Qin was the prime minister of a dynasty. He knew Li Yi's contributions to the Jing kingdom better than anyone else. His Majesty had conferred him the title of a county marquis because he had indeed made great contributions. This could not be denied by anyone. However, if he were to become the youngest golden Ziguanglu minister in the history of the Jing kingdom, it would be too much. Those who had held this position in the past were all old officials with decades of political experience and high prestige. It was really not a position that a young boy who did not understand politics could take. Emperor Jing's eyes looked to the side, and several ministers also spoke one after another. Although they did not have a negative attitude towards this matter, they did not agree with it either. They did not lean towards Prime Minister Qin, nor did they have any enmity with County Marquis Li. They just felt that this matter was inappropriate from the bottom of their hearts. The reason was the same as what Prime Minister Qin had said. It was a very important official position for the imperial court, and it could not be given to a boy who did not understand state affairs. This could be seen from his speech in the hall just now. Prime Minister Shen, who had been silent, finally opened his mouth when Emperor Jing looked over. "I think this matter. Your Majesty should think twice." This meant that no one agreed with him. Emperor Jing did not show any dissatisfaction on his face. Before this, he had already guessed the reaction of the officials. After all, Li was still too young. However, even if he really did not understand politics, as long as he was in the imperial court, he could solve the problem that all the officials could not solve. His meritorious service was far more than this, but he would not become an official with real power. Apart from this, he could not give the other party anything else. Seeing that Emingzu had been standing for a while, Emperor Jing waved his hand and no longer mentioned that matter. He said, "This matter will be put aside for the time being. As for the flood in the south," Prime Minister Qin bowed his head slightly and sighed in his heart. Putting it aside for the time being meant that it could not be changed. In the end, he still underestimated the position of County Marquis Li in His Majesty's heart. How could the King of Shu make such a strong enemy for no reason? As for the flood in the south, they also had some ideas in their hearts after listening to the comments of many officials in the imperial court. Emingzu recorded all their words. Not long after, a palace guard came in from outside. Changde stood outside the pavilion, stopped him and asked, "What's the matter?" The guard said, "County Marquis Li is outside and wants to see the first princess." Before Changde spoke, a voice came from behind. Emperor Jing raised his head, and a strange look appeared in his eyes. He said, "Let him in. Father has his reasons for conferring you the title of Honorable Minister Jinzi." "Don't talk nonsense." Li looked at the first princess and his eyes were a little surprised. The two of them would occasionally grumble when they talked, but this level of grumbling was nothing at all. He shook his head and said, "I'm not talking nonsense. This position was originally given to those retired old officials. How can it be given so casually?" Mingzi looked at him and glanced in a certain direction intentionally or unintentionally. Behind the thick bushes, an official frowned slightly and was about to step forward. Emperor Jing waved his hand and a trace of ridicule appeared on his face. The official immediately lowered his head and stood quietly behind him. "It's really not appropriate. I have to talk to His Majesty. I'm at most a little clever, but I don't know anything about governing a country." Li Yi saw her eyes looking at him for a while and then to the side. He asked in confusion, "What's wrong with your eyes? Is there sand in them? Do you want me to help you blow them?" Mingzi coughed softly, lowered her head slightly and said, "I'm fine." Seeing that she was really fine, Li Yi then asked about the serious matter, "How's the progress of the academy?" "Everything is going according to the plan. Everything is going well." Behind the bushes, several officials including Prime Minister Qin, showed a shocked expression on their faces. According to the conversation between the first princess and County Marquis Li, the matter of the academy that caused a stir in the capital city a few days ago was not done by the first princess, but by someone else? The overt plot that made countless aristocratic families complain but could not be obeyed was done by him? When they recalled that he seemed to have used the same method to almost wipe out the forces of the Chui clan and the King of Shu in the account investigation, they all felt lucky at the same time, lucky that they were not his enemy. No, just now they objected to His Majesty's reward. Would he bear a grudge against them because of this? Li Yi did not know that behind the tree shadow some people were already imagining things. After learning about the progress of the academy, he was relieved. He inadvertently glanced at a few pieces of paper on the table, looked at them carefully and said in surprise, "Are you thinking about a way to control the flood?" Mingzi did not know the intention of her father, nor did she know when Li Yi would leave. She nodded absent-mindedly, "I didn't know about it before. I don't know much about controlling the flood." The first princess finally became the proactive and diligent first princess again. Li Yi felt very gratified in his heart. He waved his hand and said, "No one is born to know. If you don't know, I can teach you." Behind the tree shadow, Jingdi's expression froze, and the corners of his mouth could not help but twitch. Chapter 779. Just now the old emperor had asked him what he thought about flood control, but Li Yi had said that he did not understand. He really did not understand. The flood in the south had been going on for a long time, and all the officials in the Imperial Water Surveillance had no solution. Li Yi estimated that by the time they came up with a solution, the flood would have passed, and it did not matter whether they could cure it or not. No matter how rich his theoretical knowledge was, it was just an armchair strategist. He did not think that the officials of the Imperial Water Surveillance who had been dealing with floods for their entire lives would know less than him in this regard. Now, in front of the eldest princess, he said that he understood. He really did understand. He was not really asked to control the flood. He was an armchair strategist and that was what he was best at. Since ancient times there has been a saying that, to govern a country, one must first control the flood. Speaking of flood control, it can be traced back to the period of Yao and Shun. Yu the Great was ordered to control the flood. Until now, it has gone from avoiding to controlling, from blocking to spreading, from spreading to guiding, from passivity to initiative, from single to comprehensive. Mingzhu's red lips slightly opened, and she looked at him in a daze. She had just heard the official's ideas on flood control. Although it was reasonable, it was extremely complicated. In terms of order, it was not as clear as what Li Yi had just said. His tone did not pause at all. From ancient times, along the timeline he talked about the deeds and methods of the officials in the past dynasties, including the advantages and disadvantages of the methods they used, what needed to be learned, and what needed to be abandoned. It was clear and orderly. Of course, Li Yi could speak in an orderly manner, because the books were arranged according to the timeline. Of course, the books on flood control in the Jing kingdom were just some messy records, but the experts and scholars of later generations who seemed to be idle to him had thoroughly studied these things, and even extended them to the field of philosophy. Thus, Emperor Jing and several court officials who were hiding behind the bushes, all knew how to apply the idea of the unity of heaven and man to flood control, how to link flood control with the Taoist theory of yin and yang and 5 elements, and how to add the idea of complying with nature to the idea of flood control. Li Yi felt that the experts and scholars of the later generations were too good at talking nonsense. After saying it once, he was almost convinced himself. If old Taoist Yuan heard these words, he would be very happy. Maybe he would be able to ascend and meet his Taoist ancestors once he gained enlightenment. Of course, these were just seasonings. In the end, they still had to return to the main topic. The flood control methods of later generations that relied on science and technology were not suitable here. However, some correct concepts would be of great inspiration to her. If the old emperor asked, she would be able to give him a clear answer. Li Yi felt that even the officials of the imperial water surveillance lacked the knowledge and experience accumulated over hundreds and thousands of years. In theory, they were slightly inferior to her. However, the flood had been there for a long time. According to past practice, there was no need to treat it anymore. The next time there was a flood, it could be used. Princess Royal Highness fully displayed the principle that a good memory was better than a bad pen, and wrote down everything he said one by one. You don't know how to control floods? Behind the bushes, Emperor Jing narrowed his eyes. The scene in the main hall had replayed in his mind for the umpteenth time. Qin Xiang and the others finally realized that it wasn't that he didn't understand at all. In fact, he knew more than anyone else. However, why didn't he say these words in court? Emperor Jing glanced through the gap. When he was about to lift his foot and walk out, there was another sound outside which made him stop again. Of course, the flood has already happened. This is irreversible. However, the impact of these natural disasters is not limited to this. Li Yi looked at the Princess Royal and slowly said, after the great disaster, there will be a great epidemic. It must be strictly controlled. Otherwise, it will cause greater harm. Also, how should the refugees who are homeless because of the disaster be settled? If the arrangement is not done properly, it will be used by people with ulterior motives to incite the refugees to rebel. What will the imperial court do? Behind the bushes, Emperor Jing, Prime Minister Qin, and Prime Minister Shen all had a dignified expression on their faces. Li Yi was right. The flood was not the most terrible. The most terrible thing was how to settle the refugees after the flood, how to prevent the outbreak of the epidemic, how to minimize the disaster. Soon they would face such a problem. If there was a little negligence, there would be great turmoil in the affected area. After the disaster, the plague would be everywhere, the refugees would flee, and incite the refugees to rebel. Such a thing was not unprecedented. Everyone's mood became heavy because of Li Yi's words. However, at this time the sound outside suddenly became light. Of course, these are small things. Li Yi looked at the Princess Royal, smiled and said, epidemic prevention must be done. Don't drink raw water, pay attention to hygiene, and establish epidemic prevention areas. These are actually very simple. I will write an epidemic prevention manual, and you can submit it to His Majesty. As for the proper settlement of the refugees, this is a problem that cannot be taken lightly. If you don't want the refugees to flee everywhere, I'm afraid the national treasury will have to spend some money. Behind the bushes, Emperor Jing finally felt a little relieved. Since he said so, there should be no need to worry about the epidemic. Then his face showed a little annoyance. If he hadn't suddenly thought of it today, he would never know that he hid his talent in front of him, the ruler of a country, and was so calm in front of Mingzu. He had been so fond of him, but in the end, he was not as good as... He suddenly realized that although Li Yi's advice was not directly told to him, the effect was the same. It was just that there was one more person in the middle, one more person that he would never envy or be jealous of. He was worried that if he showed too much, he would be entrusted with important tasks. With his temper, it was not unusual for him to do such a thing. In this case, it is not a bad idea. Emperor Jing's mouth pulled up into a smile, and he immediately had a plan in his heart. He turned his head and continued to listen carefully. Speaking of the silver allocated by the imperial court, you have to pay attention to it. Don't let all the disaster relief funds go into the pockets of those corrupt officials. To be honest, the imperial court is not doing a good job in this regard. Li Yi frowned and said, there needs to be a slight reform here, so... There were actually a lot of problems with the feudal official system, including their way of doing things. Li Yi could not completely overthrow it. He could only use scientific management methods to prevent corruption to the greatest extent. At the same time, he told her how to rebuild after the disaster, how to resettle the victims, and how to reduce the loss. He watched her write them down one by one. There had been no sound outside for a long time. Emperor Jing took a deep breath and stepped out from the back. Speaking of reform. It was rare for Her Royal Highness to study hard today. It was a rare opportunity, so Li Yi decided to talk more. He looked at her and said, In fact, there are many aspects of the imperial court that need to be reformed. Agriculture, tax, imperial examinations, water conservancy, military. What are you looking at? Finding that the eldest princess was staring at something behind him, Li Yi turned his head and looked. There was nothing there. He looked at her and asked in confusion. Nothing. Mingzu withdrew her gaze and shook her head. Listen carefully, don't be distracted. Li Yi looked at her discontentedly and asked, where were we just now? Reform. Yes, reform. Where should I start? Yes, let's start with agriculture. Li Yi nodded and spoke again. The feudal dynasty had gone through thousands of years. The dynasties changed and the country changed. In the long river of history, the spring breeze of reform blew again and again. Of course, it had to be combined with the national conditions at that time, but some places were similar. At present, the various systems of the Jing kingdom were naturally not perfect. All aspects could be reformed, big or small, to make the country rich and the people strong. Li Yi did not want her to change anything. He only hoped that she could remember some of what he said today. In the future, when facing the affairs of the imperial court, she and the officials of the imperial court were at a different level. Reforms or political reforms had always been extremely sensitive. He spoke very carefully, unprecedentedly carefully. What he talked about was also verified by history. When he took it out and put it in the court, he tried his best to avoid some sensitive aspects. He rarely touched the interests of the royal family and certain people. Although there were some small drawbacks in the general direction, it was beneficial to the country and the people. He must ensure that these words from the mouth of the first princess would not cause too much suspicion and opposition from others. Therefore he needed to be extra careful. Behind the bushes, Jing Di rubbed his eyebrows. The expression on his face could not be said whether he was happy or angry. He did not understand the imperial court. He did not understand the imperial court. If he did not understand the imperial court, no one in this world would understand the imperial court. He was happy because his talent and ability far exceeded his expectations. To a certain extent, there was such a person who was worthy of all the civil and military officials in the imperial court. He was angry because since he had such talent, why did he hide it? If he replaced the position of either of the two prime ministers, he would not have to worry about the imperial court in the future. Prime Minister Qin's body trembled slightly. His old face showed an extremely shocked expression for the first time. Evildoer, evildoer. This person could already be called an evildoer. Prime Minister Shen's face was filled with astonishment and shock. As for the other officials, their expressions were the same. It could even be said that they were terrified. He did not understand the imperial court. He did not understand the imperial court. Thinking of their evaluation of County Marquis Li, his old face could not help but blush. How could they have such qualifications? At this moment, they finally understood why His Majesty insisted on giving that position to him. In the entire imperial court, was there anyone more suitable than him? His Majesty. His Majesty was really His Majesty. Mingzu suddenly regretted it. She knew that Li Yi had never kept anything from her. But he was willing to say these words to her, but it did not mean that he was willing to let others hear it. Don't say it. She stood up and reached out to cover Li Yi's mouth. She whispered, don't say it. Li Yi was unprecedentedly focused. His mouth was suddenly covered by Jianshu, and he almost bit his tongue. His eyes widened as he looked at Jianshu, snorted twice and pushed her hand away. He frowned and said, what are you doing? Have you washed your hands? Chapter 780. It was very unhygienic and uncivilized behavior to use one's hand to block other people's mouths. Although she was the Princess Royal and there was a faint fragrance on her hand, Li Yi was not willing to do so. What's more, he had spent so much effort to tell her these historical experiences that were hundreds of thousands of years ahead of the world. They covered a wide range of aspects, which was enough to raise the comprehensive national strength of the Jing kingdom to a new level. This was a real priceless treasure. With this knowledge, not only could he show his face in the court and in front of the old emperor, but it would also be useful in governing the country in the future. It was so beneficial. It was so disappointing that she was so careless. He had always kept a low profile. He knew so many things, but had he ever publicized it? If it weren't for their pure friendship, he wouldn't have been so devoted to her. If these words were heard by the old emperor, he would not have a good life in the future. Li Yi frowned when he saw that she was staring at something behind him. he said unhappily. Hey, are you listening to what I'm saying? The Princess Royal was obviously not listening to him, and her eyes were still looking behind. What is behind? Li was surprised. When he turned his head, he found that it was not something behind him. The expression on his face froze and he asked in a daze, Your Majesty, when did you come here? Emperor Jing looked at him and sneered, When you said that I was fooling around. Haha, Your Majesty, you must be joking. I have just arrived. Li Yi looked at Emperor Jing, the two prime ministers, and a few important ministers walking out from the back. He smiled awkwardly and said, I will not disturb Your Majesty and the ministers' discussion. I will take my leave first. When he turned around and walked quickly out of the imperial garden, Changda's annoying face appeared in his eyes at an inopportune time. Li Yi turned back and looked at the Princess Royal. He lowered his head and said nothing. Emingzu was a little flustered by his gaze. She looked away and did not dare to look at him. Emperor Jing looked at the person behind him and asked, Minister Qi, do you remember what Dr. Li said just now? The prefectural water minister nodded immediately. Yes, I understand. But there are still some things I don't understand about the irrigation works, Emperor Jing said faintly. If there's anything you don't understand, go down and ask yourself. As you command. Dushui Chief Cheng was immediately relieved. With His Majesty's words, he wouldn't continue to hide his abilities, right? I'm a little tired. I will return to the palace. Emperor Jing glanced at Li Yi and walked outside. Halfway through he paused again. Without turning his head, he spoke again. In the future, when the minister sends the memorials to the palace, send them to the morning dew hall first, and then pass them to me for a look. Changda, make some preparations. I will be going to Hibiscus Garden for a period of time. This palace is really like a cage. I am really getting tired of living here. Emperor Jing did not say anything to Li Yi from the beginning to the end, but these few irrelevant words revealed a lot of information. His Majesty was going to leave the palace. The emperor had many temporary imperial residences, but His Majesty had been diligent in state affairs for more than 20 years and lived in the palace for a long time. He had never done anything that would waste people and money. This time, although it was only in Hibiscus Garden outside the palace, it was the first time in decades. In fact, it was against the rules that the Princess Royal would handle the state affairs for him in the future. The emperor was not in the palace, so the only person who could manage the state affairs was the crown prince. Even if there was no crown prince in the Jing kingdom, it should be one of the princes, and it should not be the Princess Royal. However, all the people present were important officials in the court, so no one dared to raise an objection. Speaking of reason, the Prime Minister and the ministers should have handled the affairs of the court perfectly. But all of them added up couldn't even compare to a person's little finger. How could they still have the face to speak of reason? As for persuading His Majesty to take back the title of Marquis of Chang'an County, Li Yi, they were too embarrassed to say the reason they just found. Marquis Li was young and did not understand state affairs? If Marquis Li did not understand state affairs, what were they? Did they live like dogs all these years? Emperor Jing left and so did the officials. When Prime Minister Qin left, he looked at Li Yi with a very meaningful look. He said a lot just now and Prime Minister Qin also remembered a lot. However, he knew that what he heard was just the tip of the iceberg. Regardless of whether what he said was applicable to the current situation or not, it was enough for him to pay more attention to County Marquis Li since he had such insight that even he was far inferior to. In his heart, Prime Minister Qin faintly felt that some of what Li Yi said coincided with some hazy and unformed ideas in his heart. When the officials left, they looked at him as if they were looking at a monster. If he was only a little better than ordinary people, he could be described as a talented young hero. But if he was so much better than ordinary people, he could only be described as a monster. At this time, thinking about it again, the scene in the court where many officials strongly advised His Majesty to take back the title of Marquis Li Yi was a little ridiculous. A Marquis Li Yi was desired by countless people, but he did not care at all. A group of clowns? Well done. After so many years, His Majesty should have a good rest. You young people should make progress. Before Changda left, he patted him on the shoulder and showed a rare smile on his old face. Not long after, in the Imperial Garden, except for the two guards in the distance, there were only two people left. Li Yi stared at the dense shadows of the trees in a daze. He felt that he had been betrayed. He had been betrayed by the person he trusted the most, the person he had never suspected. The old emperor and those people were behind. She knew that they were behind. She knew that she did not want more people to hear these words, but she still did it. It would be a lie to say that he was not disappointed. Not only was he disappointed, he was even a little disheartened. From a long time ago he had started to do things for her. At first, he had no choice but to hand Tianfa over to her. But later, he produced dramas, helped her build momentum, established the women's union, changed the marriage laws, promoted the correct method of midwifery, made her the support of all the women in the capital and even the world, established a women's college, new military provisions, helped her establish a close relationship with the family of generals, and recently established the Emingzu Academy to help her win the hearts of the world's scholars. And what he had said just now could make the old emperor and all the officials look at her in a different light, all without asking for anything in return. Not asking for anything in return did not mean that he did not want her to care about him. At this moment, some of the beliefs in his heart were shaken. He sighed and did not say anything. He turned and walked out of the imperial garden. Emingzi looked up and saw the desolate look on his face. Her heart seemed to be squeezed tightly. Her face revealed a bewildered expression. Listening to the footsteps getting further and further away, it seemed as if something extremely important to her had also left with it. Almost instantly, her figure disappeared from where she stood. Just as he was about to reach the entrance of the imperial garden, he heard hurried footsteps coming from behind him. They were getting closer and closer, and then they slowed down. Li stopped and turned around. He still wanted to hear an explanation. But there was no explanation. The eldest princess stood behind him. She looked up at Li Yi, her face filled with a sense of helplessness and confusion that he had never seen before. Very quickly, the confusion on her face disappeared. She took a deep breath, took a step forward, stood on her tiptoes and pressed her soft lips against his face. "I'm sorry." Li Yi was stunned and looked at her in a daze. At this moment he felt like he had been electrocuted. Li Yi seemed to have been electrocuted. Not far in front of him, 2 palace guards had already been struck by lightning. After a moment of shock, one of the guards looked up at the sky and sighed, "The sun today is so poisonous." The other guard nodded in agreement. He closed his eyes and murmured, "Yes, it's so piercing that I can't see." Chapter 781. Li Yi stood there in a daze, unable to regain his senses for a long time. He touched his face. He wasn't sure if it was an illusion, but his face was still warm. He looked at the eldest princess in disbelief. "Before you came, father and the other officials were already here." Emingzi looked at him. She had regained her composure and explained, "I hinted at you at first, but you didn't take it to heart. After that, I didn't stop them." "I'm sorry." Li Yi stared at her. Was it the main point that the old emperor was eavesdropping behind the bushes? Was it the main point that she didn't tell him that there was someone behind the bushes? The old emperor gave her the authority on the surface, but he was secretly forcing him to give in. Was that the main point? Not at all. The main point was that I treated you as a friend, but you actually, Li Yi waved his hand. He stared at her and said, "Forget it. Let's not talk about this first. You just now, nothing happened." Emingzi looked at him and said through gritted teeth. She turned and walked out of the imperial garden. Her expression was very calm, but her fists, which were hidden in her sleeves, were tightly clenched. In fact, in that instant her mind had gone blank for a moment. She didn't know what to say, so she had subconsciously done that. Only after a moment did she realize how abrupt and bold her actions had been. Li looked at her back for a long time. He said loudly, "Hey, don't think that this matter is over. You didn't even ask for my opinion. Hey, stop right there, hey." The eldest princess's figure quickly disappeared from his sight. Li Yi walked out of the imperial garden gloomily. The 2 palace guards were still looking up at the sky. They dared to look at the glaring sun. Were they not afraid of being blinded? "What is the meaning of this?" he murmured. The princess, who was always calm and rational, this time, why didn't she play her cards according to the norm? He hadn't sorted out the matters at home, so he couldn't make any more trouble. But what was with that little bit of joy in his heart? Li Yi shook his head and came to a conclusion in his heart. Eating from a bowl and looking into the pot and still thinking about the rice that was not in the pot. Men, indeed, none of them were good people. In recent days there were always some unexpected things happening. Today could be considered a very unexpected situation. Fortunately, the old emperor did not intend to use him as a permanent laborer. Instead, it was a blessing in disguise. The eldest princess had advanced a step further and was now able to directly participate in the affairs of the court. Although it was only temporary and the old emperor still had the intention of forcing him to submit, this was already a great improvement. Li Yi also felt that it was time for the old emperor to let go of these things and think about how to live out his remaining years. Opportunity should always be left to the young. As he walked out of the palace, the old emperor who was squatting under the tree stood. He was surprised, and said, "You," Li Yi sighed and said, "Sigh, it's a long story. Let me be alone. Let's go home." Inexplicably, he had become the minister of the imperial court, inexplicably, he had been eavesdropped by the old emperor, and inexplicably, he had lost a pure and innocent friendship. He really needed some time to calm down. The sloppy old man looked at him and nodded in the end, not saying a word. In the imperial garden. "Did I see wrongly just now?" One of the guards whispered, his tone filled with disbelief. The other guard nodded and said, "No, you didn't see wrongly." The two of them looked at each other and were about to speak again when they saw a figure in front of them. Their faces suddenly paled. Emingzi looked at the two of them and asked indifferently, "What did you see just now?" "We didn't see anything just now." The two of them looked serious and said, "The sun is too strong. We didn't hear or see anything." After a while, a voice finally came from the other side. "From today onwards, the two of you will be working at the Morning Dew Hall." The new residence was not far from the imperial palace. The carriage soon stopped in front of the residence. Li Yi jumped out of the carriage. Fang happened to walk out from inside and said in surprise, "Young master, you're back. I heard that you've been conferred the title of minister. Is it a very high position?" "So." Li Yi waved his hand and walked into the courtyard. Fang stepped out of the door and suddenly seemed to remember something. He turned his head and said, "Young master, what's the matter? Let's talk later." Li Yi had already seen Mississippi Lu in the courtyard. Thinking of what happened in the morning, he couldn't help but feel a little guilty. He waved his hand to the back. The most important thing was to confirm whether Mississippi Lu was bewitched. He didn't have the mood to talk to Fang about anything else. At the entrance of the courtyard, Fang stared at his back with wide eyes. "I'm back." When Li Yi walked past Mississippi Lu, he stopped and said softly. Second Miss Lu glanced at him, stood up and asked, "What did you do this morning?" Seeing her attitude, Li Yi was relieved. Although she asked him an extra question for the first time, her attitude was cold and she didn't show that kind of smile. It seemed that there was no need to disturb old Taoist Yuan's cultivation. "I went to the morning court. After the morning court, I talked with Princess Royal about the state affairs. I came back after that." "That's all?" Mississippi Lu looked at him and asked, "Is there nothing else?" "Nothing else." Li Yi nodded. He was slightly not used to Mississippi Lu's sudden concern for him. However, it felt quite good. It was like a spring breeze, silently moisturizing everything, since there's nothing else. Mississippi. Lu looked at him and said lightly, "Then can you explain where the lipstick mark on your face came from?" The spring breeze turned into the east wind. It was like a knife blowing on people's bodies and the cold wind was bone-chilling. Li Yi's heart sank. He thought to himself, "Oh no. I was confused by Princess Royal just now, and I actually made such a serious mistake." It was originally a kiss of friendship as pure as a little white flower, but when she asked, it immediately changed its meaning. Of course he couldn't tell her the truth. Li Yi's mind turned quickly. He smiled and said, "When I came back from the palace today I met Shaning. Sir, you're back." The proud Lolita walked out of the backyard and said in surprise. Li Yi looked at her blankly and asked, Why are you here?" The proud Lolita said pitifully, "I still have class in the afternoon. I don't want to go back to the palace, so I came here." "I want to eat your cooking." Mississippi Lu looked at Li Yi and asked, "What happened to Shaning?" Li Yi turned his head, looked at her and said slowly, "I just came out of the palace and met Shaning's sister." "Does this have anything to do with the lipstick mark on your face?" Li Yi looked at her with a puzzled face and asked, "Yes, does it have anything to do with it?" The two looked at each other for a long time. Mississippi Lu's eyes were the same as before. Li Yi lowered his head and said, It's really a misunderstanding. I can explain." Outside the door. "Son-in-law is really amazing." Fang leaned against the wall and sighed from the bottom of his heart. Since he knew the son-in-law, he admired a lot of things the son-in-law had done, but he had to say that this time he was really convinced. The sloppy old man nodded and agreed with this. Fang looked at him and said in surprise, "Why are you nodding? You've never married?" The sloppy old man was startled. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He put his arm around his shoulder and said in a low voice, "Little Fong, this old man has made a breakthrough in martial arts recently. Come here, this old man has a unique skill to teach you." That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.